State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation is a 9-member committee appointed by the governor to review documentation for all state of Oregon nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. The committee meets 3 times a year to review nominations brought forward by the State Historic Preservation Office. State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation. That's delayed. The committee also advises the State Historic Preservation Office on matters of program, policy, and budget. This time, I'd like to take attendance. We'll start with you, Katie. How about that? We'll go right.
Hi, I'm Katie Abrams. I'm the National Register Program Coordinator.
Val Ballstrom, SHPO Preservation Bureau Assistant.
I'm Sarah Monroe. I'm a State Advisory Committee member.
I'm Steve Mark. I'm also a member of the State Advisory Committee.
Heidi Slaybaugh, member of the State Advisory Committee.
Jamie Jones, Administrative Support, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Matt.
Matt Dietrich, Committee Member.
Cassie Rippey, Committee member. Chrissy Curran, Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer.
Ian Johnson, Associate Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer.
And I believe we have a commissioner online.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Chung, State Advisory Committee member from the Dalles, calling in from Minnesota.
Oh. We're in your hometown. You're not here.
I know.
Are there any other commissioners or staff online?
No, we don't.
Okay. All right, just so everybody knows, restrooms are down the hall and to your left. Take a second left. And we'll have a break around 2:45. And I don't think there's anybody else here, but please sign in. And then if you are providing testimony, we'll have you provide a testimony card, which we have for one participant online already. At this time, we'll ask interest of concerns, questions not on the agenda. Just a reminder that our next meeting for the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation will be a joint meeting with other Oregon Heritage Committees on October 15th through the 17th in Canby, Oregon. Should be a nice treat, going from the desert to the coast. And are there any members of the public who have submitted testimony cards besides the one that you handed to me? Okay. Do I need to share that name right now or just when we're at that?
No, once we get to that nomination.
All right. Next, we have review of our previous meeting minutes from that was Thursday, February 20th, 2025. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections to the meeting minutes? No. Hearing none, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I make that motion.
Second. Steve makes the motion and a second. We now need to do roll or approvals by name. So Jackie, do you approve the minutes? Or agree with the motion, I guess is the question.
I do.
Thank you. Matthew,
Approve.
Steve,
Approved.
Sarah, approve. Cassie, approve. And I will withdraw, what's the word I'm looking for? Abstain, since I was not present at the meeting. Thank you. Wonderful. Now, looking at our agenda for today, June 27th, are there any changes that need to be made to the agenda as submitted?
And finish it off.
Okay. I will ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Great. Second.
Second.
Perfect. Sarah has motion to approve and Steve has seconded. Jackie, Are you in agreement with the motion?
Yes.
Perfect. Matthew,
In agreement.
Stephen,
I concur.
Sarah,
I agree.
Cassie,
I agree.
Heidi? Yes. Right, moving right along. This is like the best agenda written ever for a chair. Utterly impressed. We'll turn it over to the deputy SHPO and an associate deputy for information and comments that you would like to share with us.
Thank you, Chair Slaybaugh. I will start with the crummy news first, and then we'll go on to some better news. We found out last week that, as you may know, every legislative session, the Main Street Revitalization Grant Fund has received money from the legislature in the realm of sometimes it's 5 million, and these are lottery bond sales. This budget was for $10 million for the Main Street Fund, and it was pulled out at the last minute. So we don't have our Main Street funds this year. We still have, there is money in that fund. It's a permanent fund. But we just found out last week, so we're gonna have to sort through that.
Is that a biennium or an annual?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. So in other money news, as you probably have heard, of course, the SHPO is 60% funded by Historic Preservation Fund money through the National Park Service. And our fiscal year 25 funds have been approved, but they have not been released. So SHPOs and TIPOs, that is their operating money. And it's not a good situation. So the Office of Management and Budget and the Secretary of Interior is getting pressure to release the funds. Nobody seems to know why. They seem to be blaming each other. So we're not sure what the holdup is. So we're sort of kind of holding our breath on that. And as you may also know, the president's budget for fiscal year 26 has zeroed out the Historic Preservation Fund. So last time that happened, it was in the 1980s, and Congress came to the rescue. We are completely unsure of if that will happen this time. So it's a time of uncertainty for SHPOs and TIPOs and all the other grant programs that the Historic Preservation Fund funds. So on a more positive note, you may remember in the last legislative session, they did not pass any of the special assessments that typically get reauthorized after, usually it's about 6 years. And one of those was our special assessment program for historic properties. So we introduced a bill, actually Restore Oregon introduced a bill through Representative Nose to reauthorize the special assessment program with a few changes. And it passed almost unanimously through the entire process. It was very well supported. And we now have special assessment back on the books. Big changes to it include, it's commercial only. So new applications, you won't be seeing any residential applications. It's income producing only. And the terms have changed. There's still 10-year terms, but they're not capped out at 2 years. So that properties that demonstrate the need and qualify may receive the benefit as long as there is qualified work to do on the building. And this was meant to capture those buildings first through the program in the 70s and 80s and 90s that are now, 30, 40, 50 years into into their past rehab and are unable to take advantage of it the way that it was written before. So that's really good news. And when you change a statute, you have to change a rule. So Ian is leading the rule making effort and with Joy Sears, who runs the program for us. And that, there was a public comment. The rule has been, rulemaking started. The Oregon Parks and Recreation Commission is the body that we have to go before to open rulemaking. The whole agency does. So, Joy did that in Independence a couple of weeks ago. So the commission opened rulemaking. There is public comment between July 1st and July 31st. And then we are scheduled to bring it back to the Parks and Recreation Commission to adopt at their September meeting. So new applications can start November 1st. So that's where we stand with that. It's a 6-year authorization, so we're hoping it will bring in some good projects that pair well with federal tax incentive program, as well as the Main Street program. And this is my last meeting. That's the other news. So 25 and a half years. Thank you, SACHP.
All righty, well, I guess I gotta follow that. Oh, and I will be taking over for Chrissy on July 1. So I've been appointed to that position, so I will, thank you. So go ahead and go through a little bit of, news. So I've been asked to talk about what we've, listed and not listed. So we have, we removed the Oregon Commercial Company building. That was, we're required to report this out to you as part of the, rule for the program. It burned in 2019. Sometimes we're not completely aware or we're not updated when buildings are raised. And so we just kind of try to keep the National Register cleaned up. It's a matter of neatness first and foremost, but also, for instance, if there's a emergency someplace and they're trying to figure out what properties they're going to try and save when the fire is burning over the hill, we don't want them to be worrying about something that no longer exists. Or should FEMA come in after the fact, trying to figure out, oh, well, this building was gone in 2019 fire incident, not a 2025 fire incident. So there's there's certain practicality of keeping that list up to date and neat. So we will go ahead and report those out to you. We added several properties to the National Register since we last met. One was the Salem substation. That was the one we had the tour at. That's now listed. The Port Orford City Jail, that was Val's project that he presented to you. That was one we completed internally. We don't complete a lot of National Register nominations internally, but in that particular case, it was a good property. It meets the goals in our plan to list rural properties and underrepresented histories. And that particular individual had a lot of passion, but maybe not the skill to carry it forward. So Val picked that up and we were able to carry it forward. It was a good size project for staff in that it's very discreet, small, something we can complete in a reasonable amount of time. We also listed the Wahi Grocery. That was a cool building with the native stone front. So that got listed in the National Register. The Mingus Park Community Building is also listed in Coos Bay, and they're so excited about it. They're having a community celebration tomorrow around the thing. So they are super excited, the community, about that. The Oregon Country Methodist Mission Sites MPD is going to be listed in the National Register along with the Mill Place House site. Katie and I found that out informally. Our reviewer does a kind of a open forum session. He just kind of casually mentioned that he was going to list it. And we're like, so Katie did confirm that by email before we're announcing it to you. I don't think we've gotten a formal notification yet, but a couple of other things. We are ending the limited duration appointments for 3 of our employees. The agency has larger budget problems associated with that. One is Heidi Shuchuk. She was on our Preservation Bureau team with Heidi and Val. Her last day is June 30th. Her job was doing a lot of kind of back end support for the compliance program, our login function, also our Oregon Qualified Archaeologist program, and our database support, other kinds of things. Kirsten Lopez, her last day is also June 30th as well. She was a compliance reviewer. And then we have Josh Henderson. He was with us for a couple of years. His appointment ends December 31st. He'll be working on special projects in the interim. He was brought on as a limited duration employee while we rotated Corin Tippett to Oregon State Parks to deal with some special projects. And so Corin comes back to her original position July 1, and Josh will go on special projects for us. About 6 months. I do expect him to find another job between that time, so we've kind of prioritized the projects he'll be working on. We do have a major project you might be aware of, the Heritage Hub. We have been trying to get a data management system together that would pull together all of our access databases. Yes, we are on access databases. And to have something that is geolocated by property, primarily for our resources, that's available to our users online. And if you're familiar with systems that DAP has up in Washington or the systems in California, that's kind of the model we're going towards. We have agencies hired project managers, and we're going to spend about $4.9 million on it, which is the estimate, with a build out in about 3 years is the goal, which is very fast for an IT project. Right now, we're in the process of developing system requirements with staff, with the idea we will go forward with an RFP at the end of the year. We've been attempting to pull off this project off and on for probably 2 or 3 biennia. We keep getting turned around by either the Department of Administrative Services for the state or the Legislative Fiscal Office. The loophole we found is if we pay for itself, we don't have to ask permission. So we are pulling, the agency's pulling money from Parks budget to go ahead and do this. Pretty critical that we do because Microsoft is trying to end support for access. So unless we'd like to go back to paper, we need to do the next thing. So that paper is not an option. So we're looking into build out 1 to 3 years, and it's going to be quite the project. It's going to take quite a bit of staff time, and we will be going out to our partners as we develop it. So that's my update. If there's any questions.
Thank you. We're ahead of time. So next on our agenda is Heritage Grants update by Harry Gill. So Harry is here to present the Preserving Oregon Grant and Diamonds in the Rough. The Preserving Oregon Grant. You would like to introduce the program. That is the one you're doing first. Yes.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Curry Gill. I'm the Heritage Outreach Manager for Oregon Heritage, which is in Parks and Recreation Department. And I am here today to share with you, or actually ask for action from you all in regard to both the Preserving Oregon and Diamonds in the Rough grant programs. Just a little bit of overview how these grant programs work. We have 8 consistent grant programs in Oregon Heritage, and they are under different organizations. So under the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation, we have the Preserving Oregon and Diamonds in the Rough grants. We also have the Oregon Historic Cemeteries grants, which falls under the Oregon Commission on Historic Cemeteries. The Heritage Commission has 2 grant programs, the Oregon Heritage Grant and the Oregon Museum Grant. And then the State Parks Commission approves the Veterans and War Memorials grants. Just so you have that background about why we're coming to you today. The process for both the Preserving Oregon and Diamonds in the Rough grant is they're both competitive. The applications open in January. Staff provides a variety of assistance to applicants. We have the grant guidelines. We have online video instructions for using the system. We offer a workshop. We offer technical advice from Joy Sears, our restoration specialist. And up to 2 weeks prior to the deadline, I will do a courtesy review of the grant applications. So we provide a lot to folks. We really want people to have success when they are attempting to participate in this program. The deadlines are in spring. Then there's a technical review that I complete to ensure that their applications are as complete as possible. And then we have committee members who read, score, and then come together at a public meeting to discuss the applications and determine our ranking, which is the ranking that has come to you today. So once the decision is made here by SACHP, then I notify the applicants. We give them a little space to make sure that everyone, they need to know knows, but then also to prepare their own announcements in regard to getting the grant awarded. So they'll get notifications maybe this afternoon, depending on how it goes, for sure on Monday. And then next week sometime is when the public announcement will occur.
Being matching, yes, they have to do
Yes. So now that's kind of the big picture for both of them. Now I'm going to share a little bit about preserving Oregon specifically. So preserving Oregon is a grant program that's been around for a very long time. I think 2004 might have been when it started. And this program supports preservation work for properties listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So this is any of them. We have funded trains and boats and buildings and cemeteries. So all kinds of stuff just has to be listed. And archaeology projects. The archaeology projects do not have to be associated with a listed property. So those are the key areas of funding. They are grants for up to $20,000. They require a 1-to-1 match for the amount they are applying for. For criteria for preserving Oregon, the preservation projects and archaeology projects have a slightly different criteria because the work is different. Absolutely, the work needs to follow the guidelines and standards of our office and the National Park Service, and they need to convey that in their applications. These grants are open to anyone, so private individuals are eligible for this, as well as nonprofits, local governments, universities, all the people. For the Preserving Oregon grant, we had we always try to get somebody, 1 or 2 folks from this committee to serve on the grant review committee. So for this year, for Preserving Oregon, Cassie Rippey participated, so thank you for that. We also had Molly Casperson, who's with the Army Corps of Engineers, Heidi Kennedy, who's with the City of Bend. She coordinates their preservation program. Joy Sears, for special focus on the standards. And then Jay Sexton, he's a community volunteer. He's served on some local commissions. He also was involved in the preservation work for the Willamette Range, which some of you may have seen come through before you. They've done an amazing tons of work preserving that building. And it's nice to have some of those volunteer folks to give some understanding of what it is to do the work on the ground when we have all these agency folks who have different sorts of resources available to them. So this year for the Preserving Oregon grant, we had a boost in number of applications compared to the last several years. Last year, we only had 18. The prior year, we had 22 applications. This year, we had 32 applications. 13 were awarded for preservation or are recommended for preservation, and 1 was recommended for archaeology. We had 2 archaeology applications. We also try really hard to pay attention to the geographic range of our museum grants, of our grant programs, all of them. And we had really good range for the Preserving Oregon grant this year from Eastern Oregon and primarily Baker City, because they have a very active Main Street organization that solicited a lot of applications. So we had 12 applications from Eastern Oregon with 1 selected for award there. We had 5 from Central Oregon, 4 are recommended for funding, 4 from Willamette Valley, 3 of those are recommended, 4 from Portland metro area, 1 of those is recommended, 3 from the coast, all 3 of those are recommended, and 2 from Southern Oregon, and both of those are recommended. So we had a good range of applications from all over the state, and also the awards generally, except for that east one, generally reflect are kind of relatable to the number of applications. We do try to spread it out, so when we have multiple applications from one community, it's highly unlikely that we are gonna award more than 1 or maybe 2 when we don't have a lot of money to one community. So that's part of why we have that disparity in the east side. The other thing we like to pay attention to is if it's a grant program that's accessible. And we look at how many times people have to apply to be successful. So if people apply and it's their first application and they get recommended for funding, that kind of means that it's an accessible grant program. You don't have to have a lot of practice or experience to pull off getting an award. So in this case, 6 first-time applicants are recommended for award, and 1 first award from somebody who had applied in the past. So when they do apply again, we really hope that they listen to our advice, which we offer. And we always are excited when they're successful in improving their application on the next round. This program is all about preservation. So roofs and structures tend to be highly awarded, as are windows and doors and some masonry work. That was kind of the case here, although a fair amount of the roof projects were in that Baker City bunch and also were privately owned properties. So the privately owned properties are eligible, but public owned and properties that are nonprofit owned have a higher priority. And when they are private, they really need to make the case for the community value, how much it matters to the community that this place is preserved when it's privately owned. So for recommendations, I have the list and I will read them when it's time for the action item. I did want to point out that in general, we aim to fully award the requested amount. That is because, especially now with construction projects, you need the money you need. So we try really hard to do that. However, when the ranking comes in order, if there's a smaller amount of funding left and the next one in order can use that smaller amount, they want to use it, then we will offer that to them. So in the case of this batch, the City of Madras, their project to work on the airplane hangar project, they came in kind of at that breaking point, and so they are being offered a lower amount than they requested. So if you saw that difference, that is what that is. Before I read the list and we take a motion, we have Cassie was in the room, and actually we have Joy. So I don't know if either of you have comments about the process or the applications or anything you want to share before the committee takes action.
No, I'll just say that I think it's great to see so many applications come in. I was shocked to see that many come in compared to what we had last year, so that was good. The other thing that kind of strikes me too is that, you know, all of these applicants, most of the applicants are, you know, they're not professional grant writers, they're not professional historians, they're people who are doing something because they care about the property. And so, even while the application may not be the cleanest or the easiest to read or understand, you can see that care come through. So it's nice to have that.
I will add an extra thank you to all the grant reviewers. during this grant cycle, our grant system broke in a very major way and took about 6 or 7 weeks to be fully repaired. So thanks everyone for your patience in trying to figure out workarounds to make this process still continue through and come to this meeting today. So I really appreciate that. So what I thought I would do is read the list of recommended applications, and then if there are questions from the committee before a motion.
Great.
Okay. So, and I'm gonna read them out loud because I have been asked in the past to do that, even though these are posted publicly, so. The Aurora Colony, and I'm only doing the ones recommended for funding. So the Aurora Colony Historical Society for roof replacement on the Crafts House. That's one of several buildings they have. That's in Marion County. For the city of Antelope to restore the front windows of the Antelope Historic School Building in Wasco County. For the city of Coos Bay for monument preservation work at Marshfield Pioneer Cemetery in Coos County. City of Madras, again, this is the lower request, but a portion for the repairing the hangar windows and hangar doors. And that is in Jefferson County. City of Talent for foundation work on the historic City Hall building, that's in Jackson County. City of Wasco for decking, porch siding repair of the train depot building, which is in Sherman County. To Columbia County for work on the bell tower of their courthouse, Columbia County. Nordic Northwest for foundation work on the Fogelbow House, that's in Washington County. Salem Art Association for historic elevator preservation work at the Bush House in Marion County. Southern Oregon University for open source digital resource about the history of plastic to help people understand identification and years of plastic when doing research. They're in Jackson County. And this is their actual organization name, I'm gonna say it out loud, the world famous Peterson Rock Garden Museum and Peacock Sanctuary for roof replacement on one of their properties, that's in Deschutes County. Tillamook Air Museum for some light installation and panel replacement on the hangar door, that's Tillamook County. Wallowa Resources for repointing of the E.M.M. building, which is in downtown in Wallowa County. And the Weisenfels Blacksmith Shop Foundation for door replacement or repair in Marion County.
I have a couple questions. For the city of Coos Bay, for the preservation of the grave markers, why is that following? I'm having a hard time with words today, preserving Oregon grant versus the heritage or the historic cemeteries grant.
That cemetery is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, so it is eligible.
Okay. And then for Southern Oregon University, for the digital files and resources, how does that apply?
So that's archaeology. That's under the archaeology category. So what they're doing is creating a, they're doing research and then creating a tool that people can use. So if you're out doing archaeology and you come across plastic of some kind, you can determine how it was made, around what time period it might be from. And they have created similar tools like this that are open, that I think they have bottle ones and other
Ceramics.
items, yeah.
Okay. And then my last question is, you talked about the number of applications from Baker County. So there were 11 or so, I counted 11, but none of them were funded.
Correct. So most of all of those Baker ones were from Baker City. They were all privately owned properties. Some of them were not very strong in meeting the preservation standards. Some of them did not make a strong case for the community impact, so it was the strength of their applications.
Thank you. Any other questions for Curry on the Preserving Oregon grants?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment on the Aurora Colony Historical Society and the replacement of the roof using synthetic shake. It's nice to see that, that got approved. I think that might be the third synthetic roof that the preservation grant has approved. So, we actually used it on a structure that we manage in my professional job, and it looks fantastic. And it really cuts down on, fire potential. So it's nice to see that this is becoming more accepted.
Is there a motion to approve the 14 recommended applications for the Preserving Oregon grant?
And move to approve the applications for the Preserving Oregon Food Grant.
I'll second.
Those in favor, we'll do roll call. Jackie,
Yes.
great. Nat,
In favor.
right. Steve,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Cassie,
Yes.
and Heidi, yes. Wonderful. Thank you to all the volunteers who provided the review. I've done that before too. It's a big ask, and you had about twice as many as I had previously, so thank you for your time doing that. And thank you to all 32 applicants.
Yes,
That's amazing.
they're all doing cool work.
So Curry, would you like to tell us about the Diamonds in the Rough grant?
Yes, so this grant program is designed, it's a facade specific grant for historic properties, that have been altered over time, and they are attempting to bring back historic character to the facade. We typically see commercial properties be the focus of this, although last year we funded a non-commercial property and it has glorious results, which I think we're gonna get to share in just a second. Thanks for that. The criteria we're really looking at here is the level of preservation or restoration of facade character defining features. And that it's well planned. And in this case, also the community need really needs to have some case making. So we do, again, most of these are private property. And we really need to demonstrate how the community benefits from the public funds going to a private property owner. We, in this one, we have some priorities that they're participating in an area that is a certified local government or a Main Street area, or if it's in a historic district and it's kind of helping and enhance that whole district. And of course, we look for geographic range again. So this one is very much a cool before and after kind of situation. And so they're fun to do. And since we have a little bit of time, Katie pulled up one of our projects. Are you able to do it? Okay. Let's show.
Sorry, out of the meeting, from all in PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. I can wait along. I can talk more about what happened now. Talk more? Okay. So, we had a couple of SACHP members on this committee this year. We had Matt and Sarah. Matt has now served on at least 3 of our grant committee programs, so thank you for that, Matt. And then we had Tracy Schwartz, who was not doing it with her professional role, but she is a historic preservation professional and volunteer around the state and former staff person from our office. And then we had Joy Sears on, and we also had Sherry Stewart, who is our Oregon Main Street coordinator. Because we have so many commercial buildings come into this, most of them are in our Main Street districts, and so she's a really great resource to have included here. For this year, we have, we received, again, it was a little bump up in the number of applications. We only have a total of $100,000 to award in this program, so we don't even come close to funding even half of them typically. So in 2024, we had 16 applications with 6 awarded. And in 2025, we had 19 applications, 6 are recommended. Should I keep talking? I'll keep going, Steph.
I'll share my slide. Give this presentation.
Okay.
Quickly.
All right, so this is the Shaysville School in Southern Oregon, kind of down around Jordan Valley in that area. And the schoolhouse has been on private property in an area where there's cattle hanging out. So the cattle was also hanging out in that school for a very long time. There is cattle. They recruited a bunch of community members to help clean it up and actually work on the preservation work and the restoration work. That's what it looked like originally. And there's some of the crew, kids shoveling the cow manure. This was actually really cool because they had intended to change the windows pretty significantly, but they decided to keep it closer to what it was. So that's always a good thing. So there was a lot to fix, but look at it now.
No longer help.
That's fantastic.
And they actually partnered the Owyhee Heritage Council runs a museum down in that area, and they do a lot of work in that area region. And that property owner has now partnered with them. They made this, they actually moved it too, which I know that that's a thing that we're not supposed to do, but it's not gonna have cattle in it anymore. And it also is near the road, so they are gonna have some exhibits with the museum there and have some events and things. So it's becoming much more public engagement. Yes.
Very cool. How they moved that with the shape that it was in.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, so back to this cycle. For geographic range, we had 4 applications from Eastern Oregon with 1 recommended, 5 applications from Willamette Valley with 1 recommended, 7 from Portland Metro, 1 recommended, 1 from the coast that was not recommended, and then 2 from Southern Oregon, both of those were recommended. Pretty good range. Again, we don't have enough money in this grant program, in my opinion, and I would love more because it does real cool stuff. But I also want more money in all of our grant programs, so that would not really mean much. This one's a little trickier because these tend to, when you do a facade, you do the facade and then it's kind of done. So we don't really get repeat customers for this application. But of these, the first time applications, 4 of them were first time applications and awarded, and 2 of them were people that did apply and weren't selected last time and improved their applications and were selected this time. So that's happens. Similarly, we like to fully award if we can. This, we had a breakpoint one, and so the project under Stefan Orloff is the Lynn County one is getting offered a lower amount for that reason. So about 12,000 instead of 20,000. Matt and Sarah, do you want to share any thoughts about, and if you don't mention what we talked about, I will also mention during that you brought up during the show, during that.
I had said a lot of stuff.
Okay, we'll see what you
I
say.
usually do say one. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I hadn't done this before for any program. I thought it was really interesting. And, I found that for my background, that the community use or the intended community use was really kind of pivotal for the way I tended to prioritize. That was kind of my personal selection.
Yes, that definitely came with massive implications, which is great because the community case making is part of the criteria, so it's an important. Thank you.
This is the first time I've done Diamonds in the Rough review. I really liked it. I think based on the example that Katie just showed, this is bang for your buck.
One of the interesting things that came up in the review that comes up, maybe not every year, but every other year, maybe we get a property that could be significant for different periods of time. And so they might be removing something that could be significant from the 1960s to go back to the 1980s, but what's the story? What's the district they're in? What's the period? So if they're in a district, should it be to that period of significance, or should it remain an outlier and be the 60s? And so just so you know where we land on it in managing this grant program, I think it's really good to have those conversations about why they're choosing which period of significance to go back to. But they need to make the case for it in the application. So that's where we land. If they come in and say, we wanna zhuzh up our awesome 1960s thing that is on a 1980 or 1880s building, and they can explain why they are making that choice, that can't be justified in the program. So it's really about how they talk about it in the application, but it's always a good conversation. All right, so I will go ahead and read these and then see if there are questions. The first one is the Bella Java and Bistro. This is, these are all facade updates, but this one has a fair amount of transom exposing and repairing work and some awnings. That's in Burns in Harney County. The Busy Corner is a very, it's a wood building with a storefront. It's kind of in the middle of a neighborhood, so it's less a commercial district. It's kind of a solo commercial building in a neighborhood. That's in Multnomah County. The Malin Historical Society is working on a Shell gas station building. And this application did a really good job of the community engagement because they have several of these historic gas station buildings in that community, and they're kind of making a tourism thing out of it. And in fact, one of those projects was funded by the Main Street Revitalization Grant. So this is sort of continuing that effort. And this has nothing to do with like why it was selected, but I am a fan of the automotive buildings. So I think, yeah, it's a cool story. The Sewing Bee, this is one that it's in Roseburg, and they are removing some of their mid-century stuff to go back to the older look. That's where we had that conversation I mentioned, and this is a applicant that applied before and was not selected, so they fixed up their application and project and applied again. Stefan Orloff, this is in Lebanon in Lake County, and it's a former bank building, so they are doing some repair to where masonry was altered. It's a pretty small project, but it will have a fair visual impact. This is another applicant who was applying a second time. And then the Travis Noble project is one in Marion County, and it's uncovering stuff that's exposed and reinstalling the transom windows and an off.
Any questions of Curry about the recommended nominations? Anybody like to make a motion to approve these 6?
I'll make a motion to approve these 6 Diamonds in the Rough grants.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Jackie, are you in favor of the motion?
Yes. Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Cassie?
Yes.
And Heidi? Yes. Fantastic. I have a request for the next time we review this. I love seeing that one photo. I would love to see photos of at least the ones that you're suggesting approval on. If we could, I know it's more work for you, but it would be really cool for us to put
these two pictures and see what we're,
Right. Well, you mean you want to see the ones that are being approved, not the ones that were approved the year before?
Well, I mean,
sort of with the after.
yeah, I mean, the before and after are fantastic. We always love that, but seeing what we're actually approving is really connects it together for us.
Well, request more time on the agenda.
You know, you'll be flipping through them as you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we're moving on in our agenda. With great timing, we have training on historic context, so I'll turn it over to Katie to begin our training.
Thank you, Chair Snowball. I am going to share my screen for committee member Chung, who's joining us via Zoom, and then for the 3 people who are joining us on the live stream. Thank you for your patience. Right, so today we have a brief training on historic context, including what they are, how to determine if they're the right size for given properties, and then what their role is in assessing significance according to the National Register criteria for evaluation. So, National Register Bulletin 15, which is one of the resources that you find yourself reaching for most frequently when you're writing or reviewing a nomination, tells us that the significance of a historic property can be judged and explained only when it's evaluated within its historic context, which means that without an adequate context, the nomination can't make the argument and it can't move forward. A successful context will place a property within the larger story of the forces that were acting upon it or that were acted upon by it during the period that it developed and achieved its significance. It also guides the argument for significance by enabling a comparison with other properties inside that same context. And in my experience working with people and writing nominations myself, figuring out the scope of that context can be one of the trickiest parts of writing a nomination. If a context is too limited for a given property, then you don't have enough information to see the whole picture and really understand the impact and significance of the property. So like the people in this cartoon, right, you're only seeing a portion of the elephant, don't see the whole thing. On the other hand, if the context is too expansive and it includes a lot of extraneous information, it's hard to sort through it all and determine what's actually important and why. So where's Waldo cartoon? There's just too much to easily find what you need. So we're going to talk about how to strike that balance. You do it by identifying the appropriate boundaries or parameters of the historic context for the particular property being nominated. I'll feel free to use one more quote. Park Service historian Barbara Wyatt, in her excellent white paper on the components of the historic context, lays out these parameters. She says that a context is an assessment of the significance of a property in terms of the history of the relevant geographical area, the history of associated historical themes or subjects, and within a historical and contemporary time frame. That means that theme, geographical area, and time frame are the 3 things that determine the relevant limits of the story that a nomination needs to tell in order for significance to be adequately evaluated. I'm more of a visual learner, so I really like to think of this as a Venn diagram. So the blue circle time frame, that's like absolutely everything that happened in the whole world during a certain time frame. Some of that was also happening in a particular geographical area, right? And then some of those things that were occurring in that particular geographical area during that time frame are also relevant to a particular theme or subject. And that intersection between those 3, that's the appropriate boundaries of your historic context. I have some examples to think through this, but first I want to think about the Oahu grocery store in Plains County that we reviewed in February and think about how its context reflects these 2 things. So does anybody remember the geographical area that section 8 of this nomination looked at?
Intersection of main roads.
Yeah, that was where it was located. I actually gave it away in the phone slide. It's not your county. So it was looking at a local context within the county. And then the theme, remember, it was nominated under criterion C as a representative example of a particular architectural style, which was roadside commercial. And then the time frame, the store was built in part to capitalize on the increased traffic from Milwaukee Dam, which was in the 30s. So the time period that they were looking at was around the 1930s. So this one, the Milwaukee grocery, like a lot of criterion C examples, actually is pretty straightforward. The context for evaluating the Milwaukee grocery is roadside commercial architecture in Malheur County in the 1930s. So where all three of those overlap, that's the historic context that's needed to contextualize the Milwaukee grocery store and how it can be evaluated. For cases where it's not as straightforward, I have some tips. So I'm gonna go through each of the three, but I'm gonna talk about theme first, because most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the first thing that someone tends to think about when they're writing a nomination is the theme or topic or subject, what of the nomination. So when I get the opportunity to work with someone who's kind of new to the nomination process, I like to encourage them to think about this by starting out with the list of areas of significance that are set by the National Park Service. So these are in Bulletin 16A, and they were most recently updated in May 2021. These are what goes in that boxes and blanks page on the beginning of section 8. They're really broad themes, obviously, right? They're things like architecture and industry and literature, just massive, expansive topics. And they're a good starting point for forming a significance argument because they really force you to pull back. So you're not only looking at the whole elephant, but you're looking at the savanna. Once a preparer has that identified, then they can get more specific or granular from there to target the appropriate theme or themes for their property being nominated. But the specific theme, whatever it is, still needs to relate back to one of these areas of significance. This is kind of abstract, so I'm going to show what this looks like for properties that are eligible under each of the 4 criteria for evaluation. So first, this is the one we tend to see most in nominations now, criterion A. All of these in the blue box up there are from Bulletin 15. Bulletin 15 tells us that for property eligible under criterion A, specific theme or topic of the historic context relates to an event, a series of events, or a pattern of development or activity. So an example of this, that Steve probably remembers, maybe Heidi too, is Dean's Beauty Salon and Barber Shop, which is a 3rd generation owned, Black-owned business in the historically Black neighborhood of Albina in Northeast Portland. It was listed in 2022 under the African American Resources in Portland Multiple Property Documentation for its significance under criterion A in the areas of ethnic history, Black, and commerce. Both of these areas I showed you from that set list from the National Park Service that I showed on that last slide. And then within those 2 expansive areas of significance, the preparers identified the specific themes of the historic context, which for this property are the development of African American business, which is a more specific topic that's related both to Black history and to commerce, and African American beauty culture, which is a more specific theme that's related to Black history. So these 2 themes and where they intersect, plus the geographic and temporal boundaries that we're going to talk about later, those tell the larger story of the pattern of development in which this particular building is significant. You see, that's fun. For a property that's eligible under criterion B, the specific theme or topic is going to relate to the life of an important person. And important in that context means somebody who's demonstrably significant within one of those National Register areas of significance again. So some of you probably recognize this, the Hughes Flying Boat, also known as the H4 Hercules, also known as the Spruce Goose. And it was originally listed in the National Register in 1980, but it was delisted in the 90s when it was relocated, and then it was relisted this past fall under criteria B and C. So Chrissy knows this plain story better than anyone. Do you want to give a summary of it? Or do you want me to?
Well, sure, this was a really curious one because, you look at the history of the spruce goose and it was this massive, it was as big as, there are so many superlatives around this structure. And you think that it's gonna be important, or, oh, it's the biggest this, or it flew, you know, it's the best one that flew, or the only one that, it was really the only one in the world, so. But that's actually what got it into trouble, because, so it was delisted when it was relocated. And then, to relist it, we had to make the case that it actually was important because of the innovations that Howard Hughes developed using that plane. So it had nothing to do with it being the biggest or the fastest or the weirdest. So that meant that where it was located didn't matter so much. And that's the case we had to make. That it's still, no matter if it's in McMinnville in a museum or down in its original hangar in Long Beach, it didn't matter because it was still telling that story. It was a fine line to walk.
Yeah.
Because it was in a museum, it is in a museum, and museum objects are usually not eligible for listing. And they're pretty clear about that. So it got returned once, and then, we tweaked it and they accepted it, so. Yay.
And so placing this in.
Question for maybe both of you is, if it was delisted because it was moved and the justification being that it's not in its original location, it was a plane. And granted, it only flew, well, technically it was a flying boat, but it did only fly once, but it was intended to be flown and moved. So why was the location so important to the original listing? If originally it was meant to transport troops and material.
Well, the case they made in the original listing was not the same case that we made in the relisting. So the location mattered more in the original listing.
But that's what I'm saying, why? Because to me, if it's meant to move, location shouldn't be that important.
Well, interestingly, it was moved 3 times in Long Beach.
Right.
And so what did the damage is, I don't think the Park Service knew about those moves necessarily. And because they didn't find out about its move to McMinnville for years later. So, and the move from its original context, physical location, to inside of a building in a museum in Oregon where it had no relationship.
I suppose I would argue it didn't have much relationship down in Long Beach. I mean, it just seemed like a big plane when I went and saw it as a kid.
Yeah.
In Long Beach.
But it was born in Long Beach. It was literally, it was built in Culver City and then moved in pieces to Long Beach to a hangar, and then it was moved to a dry dock, and then it was moved to that weird building, the dome building. And I honestly think that move in particular may have resulted in a delisting had the Park Service really known about it. But on the other hand, it's right there in the bay where it took its first flight, still.
Only flight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which seemed to me, when I read this the first time, and I didn't know much about context of the flight, that seemed to confuse things, where I read those innovations, like, you've got an NHL here. And so it was just a case of making the right case.
Yes, it was exactly that. This is the other thing. Was it a boat or was it a plane? Because you could say, well, in Long Beach, it was by the water, but it was supposed to fly. In McMinnville, it's by an airport, it's in a hangar. So this is perfectly appropriate. But in the end, we just pulled back on all of that and just said, doesn't matter where it is, this is why it's important. And then I made the case that they had kept it listed from the move to the hangar in Long Beach to that dome with the colored lights and the hot dog stand and, you know, and I think that might have, I think they went, oh, shoot, we did, didn't we?
Even though I'm in a conversation late, I will add this. It was, when they comment, it's called a supplementary listing record. One of the longest I'd ever read. They were really, our reviewer put in a lot of notes of exactly why they were listing this moved property and were very explicit.
In a museum.
In a museum,
Yeah.
because they wanted to be very clear that they had very, very specific reasons, and they weren't saying, come one, come all, we're listing everything that's hanging in a museum now. So, but that, yeah, there was a couple, usually they're just a paragraph, and this was really detailed.
Okay. Yeah, so like Chrissy said, the way that they got this relisted was focusing on its significance in ways that didn't relate to its setting, basically, or location. And under criterion B specifically, they were thinking about aviation, right? And specifically the innovations of Howard R. Hughes Jr. He designed the flying boat and he flew it in test runs, and the nomination demonstrates that he was demonstrably important in the history of aviation, both as an engineer and developer of aviation technology and as a pilot. And it also demonstrated that, at least in the public imagination, he's more closely associated with the flying boat than any of his other leading accomplishments. We'll talk more about criterion B in a future training, so it can be kind of a tricky one, but those are all the pieces that you need to make the argument. For this training, specifically, the important takeaway is that the specific theme is the life of a person, which is what bulletin 15 says it has to be, and it relates, again, back to one of those areas of significance. Speaking of aviation technology, like Chrissy said, the boat's also significant under criterion C. Bulletin 15 again tells us for properties that are eligible under criterion C, the theme or topic is going to be a building form, an architectural style, an engineering technique or method, an artistic value, or the use of a material or method of construction that's, again, demonstrably important within one of those National Park Service's areas of significance. And for criterion C, that's typically architecture, landscape architecture, engineering, art. For the Hughes flying boat, the broad NPS area of significance that this is selected was engineering. And then a more specific theme or topic from that might be described as aviation and mechanical engineering, but even that is really huge, and it can be granularized, into innovations in things like wooden construction, fire suppression systems, engine and flight controls, all of those things that led to some of the standard systems that we employ on large aircraft today and aerospace vehicles. One thing that I want to point out specifically about the Hughes flying boat, because it's eligible under 2 criteria, it's a nice example of something that I know Ian specifically likes to emphasize, and that's how arguments for significance under multiple criteria can sometimes strengthen and support one another. This was also the case with Val's nomination for the Port Orford City Jail. In this case, like, you can't talk about Howard R. Hughes Jr., who was a significant aerospace engineer, without talking about innovative aviation technology, specifically the innovative aviation technology that you see in this resource. So they're really tightly connected contexts, and arguing significance in one of these areas really props up the argument for significance in the other, and in that way it advances the whole nomination. That's A through C, which just leaves criterion D, which we talked about a lot at our last meeting in February when Dawn was here. For a property that's eligible under criterion C, bulletin 15 says that a specific theme is going to relate to a research topic of importance. And again, importance is defined by the relationship to those National Park Service areas of significance. So the last example that I'm going to use is the Isabella shipwreck site, which is the remains of a Hudson's Bay Supply Company ship that went down near Astoria in 1830. No photos, it's an archaeological site, but under the ocean. I can tell you that the nomination argues that this site is eligible under criterion D in the areas of significance of archaeology, transportation, and commerce. And then the specific themes that place this wreck within its larger context are maritime travel, which ties back to that area of significance as transportation, trade, ties back to commerce, and the role and development of the Hudson's Bay Company, which again also relates to commerce. So in all three of these examples, some of these specific themes are bigger than others, right? Maritime travel and trade are like huge, expansive, complex topics that nobody could ever cover comprehensively. And you wouldn't want to read a nomination that tried to cover those comprehensively, because if I tried to print it, you wouldn't be able to lift it. Hudson's Bay Company is a little more focused, but that's still way too much information. So that's where the other parameters, geographical area and timeframe, so that you can focus in and home on what the context really needs to cover in order to evaluate the significance of a property.
Katie, can I just add one more quick thing? That area of significance, when you're reviewing a nomination, and I remember a nomination that the committee approved, but that I ended up not recommending when I sent it to the Park Service. And it was, well, I don't want to say what it was, but it was a property that the area of significance was education and recreation. And the nomination, the statement of significance was in-depth, very detailed developmental history of the property. And I flipped to the area of significance, education. Okay, I'm gonna expect to see some educational context in that city. Nothing, couldn't find it. Flip back, recreation. Okay, I wanna see a recreation context. That wasn't there either. If it was there, it wasn't pulled out. And so a really quick way to check if you're getting lost in a story in section 8 is to flip back to your area, and if whatever is on the area of significance, you better see that context at the level Katie was talking about, that focus in section 8.
Yeah, area of significance is not the same as function.
Right.
That was a Where's Waldo nomination.
Waldo even in the nomination?
I don't think so. Yeah, it was a lot of context.
Which is why we're talking about this, to make sure that we're focused and finding Waldo. So if the specific theme is the one, the specific geographical area is obviously where. Broadly, the geographical area in which a context is relevant is often usually described as local, state, or national, and then there's some gray area in between for regional to try to slot it into one of those categories. So you can think of this parameter in answering the story, how big, literally, geographically, is the influence of the theme or topic that we just identified in the last step as it relates to the particular property that's being nominated. The story might be really tied to the locale, the city, town, neighborhood, defined rural region surrounding the property. And in that case, the level of significance would be local, and the specific geographical area would be that particular city, town, neighborhood, defined rural area. Around the time that I started here, I remember Ian mentioned to me that he likes the example of a city hall illustrates this. Its story is inherently tied to the local context, right? So typically the geographical boundary of the context for the listing of a local municipal building like this would be local unless it had an impact that stretched beyond that immediate area. If the story is a little bigger, if that specific theme or topic is tied to historical events outside of the local, like across the state, other part of the state, even a little beyond, then the level of significance would be state, and the specific geographical area would be Oregon, as is the case for the Oregon state capital. But if the theme is really geographically broad and the story of the property's significance is relevant within the national scope, within the entire story of American history, like the US Capitol building, which is a National Historic Landmark, then the level of significance would be national, and the specific geographical area would be the entire country. Specific geographical area, it doesn't correlate to the importance of a property. So something that's significant at the national level isn't necessarily more important than something that's significant at the local level. It's just the size of your context again, like how broad was that impact? And the third one, specific time frame, obviously the when. So I think this could conceivably line up exactly with the property's period of significance, but typically it's longer than that, is the historic context. is bigger than the property being nominated. I mean, events and trends and people and architectural styles and construction methods don't pop up out of nowhere. They develop over time. So usually the context covers the entire period of that, from the beginning of a trend to the end of, or from one particular event to another. Within that, there's going to be more context, more focus on the period of significance, and then a more cursory look at anything that happened before or after, but it's still appropriate to include all of that. In my personal experience, this is the area that is often the hardest for a preparer to identify precisely, and not because they're too focused, which can be the case of specific theme or specific geographical area where there's a tendency to get really narrow. With timeframe, there's a tendency to want to go all the way back with a particular context, like to geologic development, and then to continue through the present day with the same level of detail. The National Register not only doesn't ask us to do that, Bulletin 16A actually specifically says avoid narrating the entire history of a property and focus only on the events, activities, and characteristics to make the property significant. So contexts that are too extensive and include too much information, again, it's where's Waldo, and a distraction from the core argument for significance, which is why identifying the appropriate parameters for the context is so important to writing a tight and successful nomination. Going back on the examples we just looked at, you can identify all three of these for them. So for deans, that's nominated under criterion A. We already identified the specific themes, African American business and African American beauty culture. The geographical area is Portland, and this is really related to the African American business context specifically. Deans is significant within the growth of Black business in the Albina neighborhoods of Portland. It didn't really have a meaningful influence outside of the city, and it didn't develop within a larger trend of Black businesses throughout Oregon. It developed within a trend that was really specific to Portland, and particularly its locale in Portland. So that's why Portland, or local, is a specific geographical area of this one context. Then finally, the specific time frame is from about World War II into the 60s and 70s, which encompasses the rapid growth of Black business in post-war Portland. After the Black community was growing, a lot of people moved to Portland during World War II to work in wartime industry. And then it goes up until the impacts of urban renewal, which kind of stifled that trend of growth in the Albina neighborhoods. This is definitely a longer period than the period of significance, right? With more than 10 years before when it starts, but it's longer in order to capture the entirety of the trend and to develop how deans fits into that. Because without the development of the trend, you don't have deans. For the flying boat, just so big, its wingspan is like 320 feet or something. I think it weighs 150 tons and feet. So big. Themes, again, are aviation and mechanical engineering and the innovations of Howard R. Hughes Jr. The geographical area for this one, it's a national level of significance. So the innovations that this behemoth represents, they're not employed in just one locale, they're not employed in just one state, they had an impact broadly, and they were developed in the context of national advances in aviation engineering. And finally, the time period covered by the context is the 40s and 50s. So it begins a little before the period of significance with the wartime innovations that set the stage for this kind of aviation development. And then it continues through the completion of the plane, through its test flights, and through the years it was used as a research and testing platform. So anything that falls outside of, especially for a specific time frame, anything that falls outside of those parameters, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be included in the nomination. I encourage preparers to be really thoughtful about what they're including to make sure there's a good case for it. And there are a lot of good cases for it. So for the flying boat, there's information in Section 8 about all the plane's movements to various facilities. That's important. So you need to know that to analyze its integrity and to make the case to the Park Service that it's okay to move. Yeah, and I'm also not saying that too much information means the nomination should be rejected. I just want to encourage mindfulness in cases where there's a lot of information that's outside of these three parameters, because that might be an opportunity to trim Section 8, either by omitting extraneous information or by moving it into a discursive footnote, or appendix. So you can really focus section 8 on the information that's actually necessary to evaluate the significance of the property. Speaking of evaluating significance, so this is kind of the main event we've been building to this. So if the historic context is the what, the where, and the when, the significance argument is the why. The purpose, like we said earlier, the purpose of identifying the property's historic context and why it's so important to identify appropriate boundaries of that context is to be able to assess significance as significance is defined by the National Park Service. This is a huge part of any nomination, section 8, the statement of significance. The entire evaluative process is described in detail in this bulletin, but I'm going to summarize it in 4 points. So these are 4 things I think you should look for in nominations. The first one, so we've got the thing we just talked about, identify the context. So the theme, place, and time frame in which the property's significance can be understood. If the nomination can't convey that, like Chrissy's example, the significance can't be evaluated and can't go onto the paper. It's not ready yet. Number 2, establish that the context is significant. So this might seem like such an obvious step that it's not even worth mentioning, right? I told you the context is significant, but answering that "so what" question is really critical to making a successful argument. Ian and Chrissy are nodding because they've heard our National Park Service reviewers say before, existence is not significance. Not all historic contexts rise to the level of significance. When you're reviewing a context, you can tell that this is done successfully when it demonstrates significance and evidence that supports that conclusion. So I think a lot about my high school English teacher, I was just show, don't tell, right? It's not enough to just say this is important or to just assume that your reader thinks it's important because you've written a lot about it. That importance has to be supported by research. And that can look like primary sources. It can look like secondary sources and references to expert opinions. It kind of depends what they're writing about. It just can't be an assertion without anything besides the author's opinion to back it up.
I would add too, I call them two-headed chickens sometimes where I see a context where it's very interesting and totally not important. You know, so I mean, it's important to keep that in mind is, you know, what did this bend history either locally or the state or nationally in some way? Or is it simply just interesting? You know, there's a lot of history that is fascinating, it's interesting, but that's not the question that the Park Service is asking.
And this is also, you need to think about all 3 of those parameters, right? There are some specific themes or topics that are significant in some geographical areas during some time periods and not in others. So it has to be looked at holistically. You're looking again at that overlap. Number 3 is explain how the property illustrates the historic context. So is it just a context and then a description of the property and you're not really sure what it's doing, how it's representing that? Again, that's not ready yet. So this part of nomination should be where it gets specific to the property. So it drills down from the broader historic context, describes the particular property's history and development and the features of its specific story or composition that reflect that historic context. So in other words, this step requires placing the property in its context and explaining to the reader how it fits in. If you're a more visual person again, like I am, you want to think about it in terms of that Venn diagram from earlier. The intersection of theme, geographical area, and timeframes or historic context, and the property that's the subject of the nomination lives here. So its story is part of that. It might even be part of it. It's just not the only part, which is sometimes prepares are going the other way, where you're only looking at part of the development, not the whole historic context. So you need both. And all of this effort leads up to performing a comparative analysis of the property against other resources within the same historic context. So this step calls for the preparer to argue that within the particular significant historic context that's been established, the property that's the subject of the nomination, related it back to the context, is uniquely representative in some way. So this also goes back to existence is not significance, right? Even if you have a demonstrably significant historic context, not every property associated with that context is going to rise to the level of significance for a lot of different reasons. And also not every significant property is gonna have the same type of association with that historic context. So I put uniquely represented in quotes here, Park Service terminology from a fairly recent update to their guidance for preliminary tax credit applications. And I like this phrasing a lot because I think it emphasizes that this step is not the same thing as arguing that the nominated property is the only thing within a historic context that could possibly be eligible. A property might be uniquely representative because it has a stronger association with a particular context than many others, but it could also be uniquely representative because its association is nuanced in a way that sets it apart from other properties. For folks who attended our October meeting, I think the Juniper House is a really good example of this. So those who weren't there, it's one of a very small number of hospices that cared for people in Oregon with HIV or AIDS during the late 1980s. And the nomination established that this is a significant historic context because of the medical and social impacts of these facilities. The nomination listed the other facilities and described them, but it didn't try to argue that Juniper House is the only one of those hospices that's significant within that context. Instead, it demonstrated how the Juniper House is differentiated or uniquely representative. And they did that by showing that it was founded comparatively early, and it a lot of advocacy work. It's much more prominent and prolific in that area than these other facilities. So they're saying for that reason, this has statewide significance for that nuanced, uniquely representative association with the context. For properties that are being nominated for their significance in a context that has a lot of associated resources, like craftsman houses in Oregon, there's so many of them, it's often a lot more challenging to make that case that the property is uniquely representative. If the argument is that the property being nominated is significant under criterion C, is a really good representative example of a craftsman house, and it's in a city of other really good representative examples of craftsman houses, then it needs to be clear to the reader through comparison that the particular craftsman house being nominated is set apart from some way. Either it's really and truly one of the best in that area, or it has certain elements that set it apart in a significant way. It's not a two-headed chicken, it's not just a weird craftsman house. There's some significance to whatever's going on. Or maybe it's associated with a master architect, and there aren't a lot of other examples. There's a lot of ways to approach it, but still, not every property that fits into the context is going to be significant. The Juniper House here, it's a really nice craftsman house, right? And it exists within that context of craftsman houses in early 20th century Portland, but it's not among the top examples. So if its nomination had tried to make a criterion C argument as an example of a craftsman house, it would have fallen apart in the comparative analysis, which is why that step is really important. It wouldn't be possible to show that it's uniquely representative of the craftsman style like it is at HIV/AIDS hospices in the late 1980s in Oregon.
I think this is as Katie said, an excellent example. And I always try to remember that every building has a story and a reason for existence, right? It was not dropped off by aliens, right? You can identify a history, you can identify a story of everything. It has, but it's getting to that uniquely representative piece. And that's what this committee's really asked to do, is what is uniquely represented within an important context. Because anyone can tell you a story. I mean, again, the building wasn't dropped off by aliens. There's a reason it's there. Somebody built it for a purpose and it was used. Okay, well, that's every single construction on planet. So I think, really trying to divide that out is what the work committee is.
And you really kind of have to make two significant arguments when writing a nomination. You have to show that the context is significant, and then you have to show that the property is significant within that context. Both those things are really critical. I still want to talk about comparative analysis.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, this is a great building. I'm still excited it got listed, that's all.
So
That's for our next meeting. I don't think there's enough room in this anywhere in there.
I mean, yours should be hosted. So on the other end of the spectrum from craftsman houses in Oregon, where there's a ton of associated properties, where the nominated property is the only extant one that's associated with its context, the nomination isn't off the hook. It still needs to make it clear to the reader as it is the only one. So Val's nomination for the Port Orford City Jail that we looked at in February. That building is the only extant public building associated with Port Orford's early city government and with Mayor Gilbert Faithful, right?
Yeah.
And Val demonstrated that in his nomination by describing how all the other early city government buildings burned down. So because it's the only one, the nomination was able to argue that it is uniquely representative of its significant historic context, because there's nothing else that's left.
So quick question, that has a lot of integrity, obviously. And what if it didn't? What if it's still the only one, but it had been changed and altered and maybe added on to? When you do that?
Good question. Hadn't really thought about that. I mean, I sort of thought the other way around. It's like, if that hadn't been the only thing standing, this probably would have been eligible under aid because cable was really important, but the really important building connected to him, or so. So I hadn't really thought about sort of if this building had been altered, because can't imagine what you would do.
There's not much to alter.
Yeah, well, what if it was partially in ruin?
Yeah,
You might have a site then.
Yeah,
yeah,
I might. But what if it had only fallen down 20 years ago and didn't qualify for archaeology, but it is still,
Or what if there are remains of those other buildings that burned down?
Yeah.
Those are archaeological sites, what about that?
This was back to when I was, remember last time, lead reviewer. In that case, I would switch tack into a different argument. And I think I mentioned it at the time about the prevalence of drunk driving in Oregon. Here's in an isolated place where you could say, and then maybe go through a number of news articles saying, that's why it's there. And I think that would have been, you probably don't want to open that box too much, because anything with crime, there's a lot you don't know. But good integrity, and I thought that will do it.
If you made
What's your
that
take?
argument, what would you be comparing it to in the comparative analysis?
Well, you might have to go county versus county at a time when, and then make the lobbying argument. You know, you had suddenly an argument or an incentive for people to go after just about everything on the landscape that was old growth timber. And in that context, before insurance kicked fully, you've got a lot of people on the road when anybody wise would be off the road. I was thinking about two arguments that often are raised with through a period of significance. And sometimes with these local A's, we get into this default mode of, okay, date of construction, if indeed the thing was even finished at that time. So I think that's always been a weakness. I think the uniquely representative is actually, it's a very good way of looking at these things. I just like to see it in law, regulation, or agency policy. And maybe it will be, at least in agency guidance in the future.
That's a good point. You do have a lot of people who kind of, there's certain knee jerks that happen in National Register nominations. You know, the nominated area is the tax lot. The creative significance starts with data construction. Often that is true, but it's important to say, well, does that actually make sense? Because of the context, the significant context doesn't begin until 30 years after the building was constructed. Well, it's not gonna be the construction date, that's for sure. It's gonna be when the context starts. So making sure when you're looking at nominations, the information on the data sheets or the application is matching up with the context. You know, does it actually make sense? Now, honestly, that's stuff that tends to catch, like, no, that doesn't make sense. So every once in a while you get someone to you because they have the right to appeal across staff and just kind of have their time. You will get maybe something that's ready. And Katie's pretty good about giving you, and Robert, when he was in the position, kind of giving you a heads up. That's the questions like, please consider, you know. But generally, those are the types of things, especially with new preparers, that we're helping them work through. It's like, oh, you know, because they get an example. Oh, well, let's just move the date. You don't have to change your argument, and we help them kind of get that taken care of. But getting back to the integrity question, That has been a longstanding one. The one that I remember is about 20 years ago was in Arizona where the Japanese internment site, which is, there's very, very little there, but the Park Service did list it, and I was in Arizona at the time, it was a big deal. And the reasoning behind the Park Service listing, there's such a nationally important site, the fact that you could see anything of it. And it was basically, and because it's the desert, all that was left, I mean, when you scar the ground there, the scars remain forever, like the building footprints, and that's all you can really see there. Maybe some barbed wire, scattered archaeological sites. In that particular case, they said there was enough there to understand the camp, there was enough remnants. So the parks were, and the significance was important enough, and comparatively, all the other sites across this desert Southwest that didn't be developed. So this is kind of what you've got if you've got it. I've seen that argument made on several different properties, but you do sometimes have, is there enough there, right? Yeah, it's important context. This is the only site, but wow, it's gone. I mean, there's nothing to list here, or it doesn't convey the character defining features, and it becomes what I call a place to put a flag. You know, I mean, you just, on this spot, and that's, you know, where your interpretive panel with a picture of it when it was in, and that's what you get, because you don't actually have a listed property. And you will see those at this committee where people are, you know, it's very marginal. Sometimes we will choose to take those to you because you're the group of 9 experts, and you get that stuff that's really make an argument either way.
So Chrissy, if this did have like a gable roof added onto it and a wing addition, but it was still the only extant example of early city buildings, what would you do?
I would ask if somebody who was around during its period of significance, would they recognize it? So it pretty much ought to look pretty close to how it looked during the period of significance. So you may have a great story or significant context, but then what you're missing is the integrity. So.
And you can also go inside, outside. So let's say the outside is really messed up,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
walk
the
inside and
inside.
it looks like a jailhouse, you
Yeah.
can say, you just,
Yeah,
no, you know, it's not trying to get by. You have to acknowledge the alterations to the exterior. You can say, but you know, jailhouse keeps people inside. So I've got the cells, I've got the bench, I've got all the inside stuff. You can also flip it on the outside, which works better for criterion C, where you can say, I've got all the architectural wingdings and other kinds of things, but when I get inside, boy, it looks like IKEA. You know, it's been completely remodeled all the way through. So, but that depends on your context, it depends on your argument, and our reviewer's pretty sharp. He doesn't always buy it. So somebody's gonna say, it sounds like you're trying to thread a needle, and that's, you know, you don't have to go back to that their argument, and he's not shy about pushing back when he doesn't think it's met.
Another piece of that is also how the building works.
Mhm.
And I just went on a great tour, and it was focused on one of these wonderful cathedrals, but it was all about, it was called a roof tour. It was about how the building works.
Mhm.
And there you have a much more solid foundation for an argument as far as significance than these. Okay, I'll say it again, style, because style it's often more a creation of a writer long afterwards, and often focuses on details that don't really matter as far as how the building works.
You get a number of AC nominations for functional buildings, like I'm thinking warehouses, laundry buildings, farmsteads, if they're done right, is basically a farm to factory, right? You're producing a product. Where it ties the trend farming, for instance, with the factory pieces and how that's organized. I mean, you know, farms look kind of messy, but when you start thinking about the logic about what they heard, there's a logic behind placement of buildings and how they're oriented, the buildings that are there, because it's about efficiency, it's about creating product. And so when you're getting the cathedrals and the functions is the same kind of thing. You can line up A and C to support each other and say, here's the context, form, function, significance. Often those end up being, unless that was a particularly prominent factory, an example of a type argument.
Such a good segue to discussion. I kind of want to interrupt it with another slide, but I've got one more for you, really short, just to think about what comparative analysis can look like in action, in a nomination when you're reviewing. Some preparers like to weave it into the section 8 narrative, like Val did for the Fort Worth City Jail. Some like to do it in a separate subsection called out by a subheading, like the comparison of Juniper House, where they're kind of listing out all of those other comparative examples. Either way is okay. The important thing is that the information is there and that it makes the case that the property is uniquely representative. The way it's formatted doesn't really matter.
So,
And that's all I have.
so Katie, would you mind, I don't know, were you gonna address, comparative analysis in a separate training or? Cause I know you talked about it a little bit here, but are you gonna follow up on it? Cause otherwise I'm gonna poke you to talk about, Paul's pet peeve on comparative analysis.
Oh, that was actually what I touched on earlier when I said that I like the term uniquely representative, right? Because it again implies this doesn't have to, this isn't the only thing that's eligible in the historic context. Our reviewer, Paul, one of his pet peeves with nominations, other than existence is not significance, right? Is when they kind of like
Trash
down,
talk.
yeah, that's trying to think of a way to say it again, thank you. Trash talk the other properties that are associated with that historic context, and they're like, this one sucks, you know, only this one that I'm nominating is eligible. You don't have to do that, you just have to show that it's uniquely representative.
And sometimes I like to weave it in like Val did, the comparative analysis, but that's just my personal preference. And also I like to read them that way, but sometimes preparers will actually dilute their case with their comparative analysis because I'll have a picture, you know, pictures, and like,
Especially for criteria and C.
Yeah.
That's one of those common styles, and you're like, oh, there's actually a lot of really good
actually,
examples.
there's a lot of stuff there, yeah, and for
Why
some
would
of
you get to that step and you find that? Maybe it's not eligible.
yeah, exactly. That, and like you said, sometimes you get all the way to this stuff in your process and it's like, oh. But that's when you remind yourself that there's a reviewer in Washington DC who has no idea what the context is. He's never been, he has been here, but I just mean he's not here. He doesn't, you have to, the preparer has to be the one to convey that through the document. And that's when there are some times when you think, I know this is uniquely representative, the case is in here, but is it gonna be sufficient for a reviewer to, he shouldn't have to pull it out. It should be pulled out for him.
I think the big push I always with these nominations is, you know, they have a life after they're passed by the National Park Service in two important programs. One is the federal tax program, and then the other one is compliance. And if you have context and descriptions, you know, section 7 is nail by nail, board by board. And, you know, section 8 starts with the dawn, with the big bang, and goes to the present, without a lot of signposts. With federal tax, where they're trying to figure out what's going to get the tax benefit and what are the character defining features, you've made it incredibly difficult for all parties involved to move in. It's like, okay, is the tin ceiling described in 4 or 5 paragraphs of detail? The tin ceiling in the broom closet significant enough for us to deny the tax credit based on that? That's the question they're actually asking. A little bit of exaggeration, but not much. So if you describe something in a lot of depth, seems to be important if you didn't state it. For compliance, it's the same thing. It's like, we gotta figure out if this is adverse effect. We're gonna put a new light fixture in the coat closet. Is that an adverse effect now? You know, it's described in detail. So making sure that the nomination focuses on, it has the right context, it focuses on what's important, helps practitioners later figure out what exactly they're trying to preserve, whether it's for the federal tax credit, from some of our grant programs, or for compliance. When we have these, you know, nail by nail, board by board nominations, they are not helpful. They are a huge burden. And I've sat in rooms where there's greatly heated debate as we try to sort this out with multiple parties, and Joy has too, sat across from the papers and whatnot, trying to figure out or sometimes we've had great disagreements with the tax credit people back in Washington DC on things. So anyway, just kind of give you a sense of, you know, these do live and are significant, you know. Now, of course, not every nomination is going to be a tax credit or compliance. That's not the case. But often when they are, that's the document we're looking at.
Something Ian's getting at is character defining features, which is related to this one, explaining how the property illustrates the historic context, identifying specifically what features of that property are illustrating the significant context, making it clear in your nominations so we can enjoy aren't arguing with everybody over what those are.
But we love to fight, so.
That one there is, you see that all the time where you've got this really well-written context and it never mentions the building. Oh,
So the instructions I give to all my new reviewers, if the building isn't built by page 2, you're wrong. Like,
I'm not
it's,
smart enough.
but-
It depends on the property, because sometimes I feel like I need to know what was going on
Yeah.
before they
Not a
lay the
building.
cornerstone.
or the site isn't created, or like, if I don't have the thing by page 2, I'm like, where is it? Like, like, now, to Kate's point, sometimes it's merited, but, but if you're on page 5, 6, 7, and it's not there yet, maybe it's okay, but you should start questioning, like, why aren't we to the thing yet? So.
Yeah, and I think again, go back and look at your time frame. Maybe it's not appropriate. Maybe we need to move some of that to the FedEx and put it out. So that's all the context I have for you. We've got about 10 minutes. I have some discussion questions to think about, but I also wanted to hold time for you and Chrissy if you have anything else to add.
You did a nice presentation, thank you.
that's a great presentation. Yeah.
Will
This
you
is
share
the
this
fun
with the committee, the presentation?
Can I do that?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Because I will use it as a cheat sheet.
This cheat sheet, a version of this is actually something I gave to Ian and Chrissy at my interview.
Might be what part of the she got the job.
And also, you teach or you used to teach the National
Yeah, this is.
Register course.
I was telling you, it's a little different, giving and training to people who are reviewing nominations, those people who are writing one for the first time and really don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy both of them.
This is the fun stuff.
If you'd like to read an example of a nomination that has a whole heck of a lot of context, it's very difficult to get. The Pilot Butte Canal
Oh,
nomination is epic. It's about this thick.
The warrant, yes.
Yeah, it is very detailed, includes a lot of great information. And it's well done and it's well documented. But it is a good example of kind of losing the thread in it. And our reviewer actually I had to have a phone call with him. He's like, I'm not getting it. And he's their head reviewer there. I mean, he writes the bulletins and, leads there. And he's like, I'm lost. I'm not getting it. And so he says, I think the case for significance is on page such. And so I had to have the discussion with him and he's like, okay, I can see that. Let me have a couple more days to look at it. And he did list it. Part of it too was what made that nomination difficult is, we were pushing out on listing segments of a larger district, which Park Service at the time was really pushing hard back against. And so that was the other piece that was complicated, right? You want us to list a piece of a much bigger thing? We're really super uncomfortable with that. We don't know that that's appropriate. So we were able to make that case to them, but it's a good example of kind of burying the lead in a document. So, I mean, if you want comprehensive history of canals in Central Oregon, it's a great read, but it's a tough nomination.
You have a couple questions to think about if you want to have like about 10 minutes of discussion. So one thing I can like to ask when I was teaching was how do changes over time, not only to the property, but in the way we think about properties and the information that's actually available to us, like newspapers that are getting digitized and more accessible every day. How can those influence the framing of themes or the way we evaluate significance? I think we're actually seeing some of this right now, people revisiting old nominations and adding to areas of significance.
So this actually came up in our Diamonds in the Rough grant, and what was considered period of significance for one of the applicants. Now, the city had a historic district and the period of significance didn't address the alterations from the event that could now be considered historically significant, because at the time it wasn't old enough and it wasn't deep enough in the history of the community for them to think like, oh, this event was actually pretty historically significant. Now time has passed and we do a look back and maybe that event actually is historically significant. So alterations to that particular building as a result of an event may now be character defining, where they want to remove it and return the building to the older period of significance.
I like your illustration too, Carla.
It's awesome, I can hear
I
it.
figure out that's a really good point, that not just about where we're changing our thinking, it's also just like the literal passage of time or that kind of 50-year things that might not have been eligible because they didn't rise to the level of exceptional significance, so they didn't meet criteria consideration G. Over time, they might achieve significance, and then we need to think about reevaluating. Ian, you have a good example of main streets. Do you want to share that one?
Which one?
A lot of main streets developed in the early 20th century, and then they have like a secondary boom.
Oh, yeah, so you have the, the traditional, two-part or three-part block brick commercial downtown. So Oregon, when they were developing highways, that was a great way to, have paired streets, for instance, right? So, one way going one way and one way going the other. What you see is the redevelopment of all the storefronts where they tear them all out and they put in gigantic picture windows and angle them towards the direction of traffic. Because when you're driving 25, 30 miles an hour, your chance to view that window is pretty small. So you're going to increase that opportunity by, angling the window the correct way and a big display window. And so now, of course, everyone hates that look, right? It's got the little Roman bricks in the big window and everyone's like, ew, ick. And they immediately want to rip it out and do something else. But is that significant? Absolutely. I mean, you can, it's an important trend. It's, downtown commercial retailers trying to stay relevant. Even in that early period, you're starting to get like Piggly Wigglies with parking lots. You're starting to get, kind of early development of malls, and downtowns are losing, and they're losing really bad. Which accelerates them through the 20th century. So it's one of those things. It's like a great illustration of that alteration that is historically significant that no one likes. And we get into that sometimes where folks will want to write a period of significance that starts with that first downtown building, and then they run it through the last constructed building, like in 1950, whatever, or 1960, whatever. And then they're like, well, we'd like to, getting the tax credit project, or Curry's talking about the grant, we'd like to tear out the storefront line. That might be a little tough, especially if they spent, 2-3 paragraphs in section 8 talking about auto culture and the alterations, based on that, making observations. And so sometimes, especially in the example, you can get to some pretty complicated issues, especially when you have long periods of significance and expansive context. It can, sweep in quite a bit. Now that's, of course, for this group, they're not asking you to think about the implications down the road. That's someone else's problem. But, that's what can happen when you have really long periods of significance, very in-depth context. It can also be very positive, where you can capture the span of the development of a downtown over 50 years and really tell a great comprehensive story about that. So is that what you're hoping for? Excellent.
The other thing I think is really interesting is thinking about multiple contexts or multiple areas of significance, right? Or multiple criteria too. We talked about the examples where arguing for two criteria can kind of advance your argument, prop each other up. Ian's examples of functional properties is good there. Is there a tipping point though, or are there any times when a nomination can get too scattered if it's advancing multiple arguments?
I always have thoughts, but I think, well, there's two things we tend to see. Is one is, I'm gonna go for everything, right? I'm gonna check all the boxes and list all of that. With Alan Kay, you're very good at batting that down when it comes up. But I think where you see a lot of this become a problem, you're looking at nomination and you've got multiple contexts or multiple topics. They might have checked multiple criterion, but that section 8 especially reads like tree. And they never tell you what the forest is and pull all those themes and all those ideas together. You can see it when they check multiple criteria. It's like, here's the criterion A. Boom. Very complete, very nice, well written. And then here's criterion C, like we're talking about a completely separate building, right? And the two never cross, which
if you can do that, but it can be disorienting and it can be difficult in that it starts to repeat information, or it can be perceived as having contradictory information because it wasn't conceived of as being together. Now, that's not necessarily a negative approach. I mean, there's many right ways to write nominations. And I would never say, this is the way you write this kind of a document. There's options to be more likely to be successful. But often that kind of segmentation of that where it's, you know, multiple criteria, multiple areas of significance, multiple periods of significance can be very distorting. And the other thing too is our reviewer, you could choose 2 criterion, 4 areas of significance and 2 periods of significance. He's going to check to make sure every single one is met. Have you made the criteria a agriculture argument under this period of significance and this level of significance? Yes. And he's gonna go back. Have you made this combination and this combination and this, you know? And so you wind up being relatively complex and you wind up with a section 8 summary paragraph that's kind of starts to become unwieldy. We tend to push people towards what's the most salient and important context. We used to push them towards what was the easiest, and we've moved away from that under our preservation plan to really push significant histories, even if that is a more complicated story to really, because criterion C is the easy one to go for because it's most visible, and we were pushing folks towards that, but we've been trying to, where it's appropriate, guide folks towards the more significant context. And then if we happen to be able to pick up another one and it makes sense, it's not square peg round hole situation, we'll do that. So
I can vouch for that because of my career writing nominations in Oregon. I've never done a criterion C nomination, we've all been A.
Oh my gosh. I actually don't do it that way.
that's fine. You're retiring.
I have fun to each of you later. I like to just get it listed with the most obvious story that the public can understand. And so I don't want to build an esoteric case. I just want to get it listed because then you can do so much with it. You can add on, you can add to the nomination, you can use it in an interpretive circumstance, you can use it for community outreach, you can layer. The listing to me is just the beginning. And I want to make sure that the public interest is met. So they don't have to dig too deep to understand why that building is important. And sometimes you can't avoid it. Like, you know, Jim Pepper's house in Park Rose is just a regular house and you wouldn't even look twice at it walking by. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be listed. But especially with the bigger buildings and the public properties and things like that, I think it's important that people can instantly go, that's a lovable building. That is probably important. I get it. Criteria C. No.
The way the nomination is written can really help support that too. So when Ian was saying, reading nominations about tree. Some nominations, I think California actually has all of their preparers do it this way. They split section 8 into arguments by criteria. We don't have any rules about that here in Oregon. Yeah. So you do your whole criterion A argument, and do your whole criterion B or C argument, split it up that way. So
Generally,
those are maybe for cases where they don't prop each other up or don't really.
And generally, we allow for a lot more variation in our nominations in Oregon. We tend to hammer down on the appendices, section 8 summary. So just so you mind, direction to staff is just make the section 8 summaries correct. If that requires you to rewrite them for the in-person, go ahead and do that, because that's what our reviewer, when the control unit is the first reviews comes in, that's what they're looking at. Appendices, the form, and the summaries. And if that is out of order, it gets kicked, it can get kicked back even at that point, although the reviewer will look at it. But for the nominations, because we have them done for preparers, that people love these buildings. And sometimes this is a life's work. You'll see people who have been preserving these buildings for a long time or been involved in the community a long time. You just kind of let them have their moment. And as long as they check the boxes and they, if they write something that kind of is in the zone and maybe it's not completely the way we would do it, if it's in the zone and it's working, You know, because that's the way to keep them involved. Otherwise, we're doing what other states are doing, and we're taking their work and we're rewriting it or we're writing it ourselves. And we only have so much staff capacity. So, and I think, well, I think some folks can take some pride, although sometimes we get a request where somebody's like, I cannot write section 7, could you please do that? And we're like, oh, sure, and it saves us too, right? You know, we'll just help them do it, or like a comparative analysis, or I'll have Katie write the really yucky parts, like the section 10, you know, boundary description, because no one likes that, and it does need to be right, so it's kind of like, could you just write that for them so that it's correct?
She gets all the scut work.
Well, that's staff, right? We don't. Yeah. That's what we are. But you know, I mean, so I mean, so you'll see, if you look at other states and you look at their guidelines, they'll be like this, like this, like this. We so far have chosen not to do that, so.
I don't want to cut too far into our break, so I think we can wrap it up there.
Thank you, Kate, for the presentation and the training. Very helpful. We're gonna take a short break. It's 2:49. It'll be 2:50 by the time I stop talking. So we will come back at 3 and we'll come back. We will start at 3. So please be back at 2:59.
That's gonna be easy, since there isn't any.
Let's do it. Bring our. Thank you for taking a break. Hope you enjoyed your break. Just read. Recording, ready to go? Perfect. This afternoon, we have reviews of 2 National Register nominations. I will read an opening statement for both applications. They're not, do that every time. They're nominations, not applications. And knowing that the applicant for the second nomination is here, if that's okay, I'll just read it once. Thank you. So the National Register of Historic Places is the nation's official list of districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, and culture. The records are maintained in Washington, D.C. by the National Park Service under the authority of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Over 2,000 properties located in all 36 counties of Oregon are listed in the National Register. Oregon listings presently include over 150 historic districts. In order to qualify for listing in the National Register, a property must possess and retain its historic appearance and be historically important at the local, state, or national level. A property's historic importance is determined through one of 4 criteria identified by the National Park Service. Those criteria are: 1, association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. 2, association with a preeminent individual displaying 3, displaying a distinctive characteristic of type, period, method of construction, or work of a master. Or 4, contains the potential to yield important information on prehistory or history. The review process is limited to the consideration of these criteria and whether or not the document is technically complete and correct. When the committee determines that a nomination is eligible for listing, it recommends that the State Historic Preservation Officer sign the nomination and forward it to the keeper of the National Register in Washington, D.C. for review and listing. Nominations not meeting the listing criteria are either tabled to allow the applicant the opportunity to revise the nomination or not recommended for listing. This time, I'll turn it over to staff to present our first nomination, which is the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union in Union County.
Thank you, Chair Slaybaugh. The committee will now review the proposed National Register of Historic Places nomination for the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union, later the Union United Methodist Church, and now the Catherine Community Center in Union, Oregon. The Methodist Episcopal Church of Union is located at the corner of Main Street and Delta Avenue, just north of downtown Union in northeastern Oregon. It's located at the west end of a half-block tax lot, and the nominated boundary for the property is just a portion of the tax lot, including the church building and its surrounding landscaping. A parsonage and a shed that were added to the property after the completion of the original church building and that don't match it in style are excluded from the boundary because they do not contribute to its significance. The Methodist Episcopal Church of Union was constructed in 1905. It was the second home of Union's Methodist congregation. It has a stone foundation and is constructed of brick with wood framed gable ends. And it has a prominent bell tower that contains the primary entrance on the west facade. The nomination identifies the church as a vernacular example of the late Gothic revival style, which appears in characteristics such as the pitch of its roof, its pointed arched stained glass windows, and decorative elements that include simple brick hood moldings over the windows and wood tracery. It has a modified Greek cross plan, which means that it has 4 wings of approximately equal size that extend off the central massing, kind of like a plus sign. The church also features a few characteristics that are normally associated with the Queen Anne style in its imbricated gable ends, there's a lot of shingles in there, and the millwork and finials and the bell tower. The nomination specifically cites Rosalind Clark's book, Oregon Style, Architecture from 1840 to the 1950s, which explains that Oregon churches in the late Gothic revival style often comprise multiple rectangular volumes arranged at right angles, as seen in the Union Church, and that vernacular examples of this style seen across Oregon also often incorporate distinctive details of another style, like Italianate, or as we see here, Queen Anne. So the architect and the builder of this church aren't known. The preparer did reach out to the archivist for the Oregon Idaho Annual Conference to use the records for the Methodist churches in Oregon, but they didn't have any information on file from these early years. However, the preparer, with the help of Val Balstrom's research, offers the possibility that the church's design might have been inspired by popular fan books of Benjamin Price, who created an annual catalog of standardized and customizable church designs that was published by the Methodist Episcopal Board of Church Extension. Since the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union was constructed in 1905, there have been relatively few alterations. Compared against this postcard, it's the earliest photo we know of the building. The only notable alterations on the primary and secondary facades are some changes to the landing and landscaping at the corner of the property and the enclosure of the bell tower with wood slats. On the south side of the building, which you can't see here, there's also a small chimney that's been removed over the roof. The big alteration to the exterior is the construction of this one-story addition off the rear of the church. So this was added in 1955 to provide additional meeting space and also kitchen and bathrooms because the 1905 building wasn't found. The addition is low profile in comparison to the church, uses brick veneer cladding, and it was placed at the rear of the sanctuary space off to the side of an office. So that little window is there, so it doesn't cover any of the original stained glass windows. The non-addition argues that because the addition is inconspicuous from the church's primary and secondary facades, as well as clearly differentiated from and subordinate to the original church, then it doesn't negate the building's integrity. Inside the original church building is one story with a mezzanine level in the west and north wings. It retains a lot of its original woodwork, including these rolling partitions here that can be raised and lowered to close off the space below those mezzanines and create discrete places. Both the rolling partitions and the curved wood pews, which are original to the building, are similar to some that were advertised in that same church catalog that I mentioned earlier. The hardware on the partitions. Yeah, it is even stamped with the name of the same manufacturer. It's hard to see here, but it's J.G. Wilson. Same one is advertised here. While the interior of the church retains a lot of its original layout and finishes, there have been some alterations here too. The most notable ones are mostly in the upper mezzanine levels, where around the 70s or 80s, some sliding wood panels were installed to be able to close off these areas, kind of the same idea as those original rolling partitions in the space below. And laminate wood paneling was installed on the walls. The ceiling has also been covered by acoustic tiles. One of the openings for a rolling partition is covered with a temporary wall in which a door is cut to an office space. And the other alcove is a glass memorial case and some wood shelves that have been added around the fireplace. Overall, the nomination argues that despite these alterations, the church is still able to communicate its significance under criterion C in the area of architecture as an excellent vernacular example of an Oregon church in the late Gothic revival style. The nomination explains that the church has most of the defining characteristics of the style, including relatively steep gable roofs, arched windows, wood tracery, wood moldings, and more. The nomination also states that the church exhibits some features that are characteristic specifically to vernacular Oregon examples of the late Gothic revival style, including, like I said earlier, that massing with multiple rectangular volumes arranged at right angles, creating the appearance of separate wings, and then minor but distinctive details of another contemporary style, in this case, the Queen Anne style. The nomination also addresses the fact that as a religious building, the church satisfies criteria consideration A for religious properties, because it's significant for its architecture and not its religious merit. Moving to our discussion, some things to consider today are, does the nomination make the case that the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union embodies the distinctive characteristics of the late Gothic revival style seen in vernacular buildings in Oregon? Does the nomination make the case for local significance? Does the church retain sufficient integrity to communicate that significance? Please note this property is located within the CLG, although we did not receive their comments on the nomination and time to share. We did, however, receive several letters of support from other members of the public, and those have been shared with the SACHP before this meeting. We also have the preparer on Zoom who is ready to share her testimony. But does the committee have any questions for me or for other SHPO staff before we welcome testimony from the preparer?
Thank you. Before we do that, I will ask if there are any conflicts of interest from the commissioners on this project. Do I need to do a roll call on that one? Okay, no conflicts of interest. Jackie, any conflicts of interest? Might not be back on, but
She is logged.
assume no unless she types on and says she is. So we have received, register for testimony from Cherie Kostler. I pronounced that correctly. And I believe she is online. Is that correct? Okay, so at this point, I'll turn it over to Cherie to, provide any testimony on the subject property in the Methodist Episcopal Church in Union.
Okay, Cherie, I have asked to promote you to panelist. You could accept that.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. You can turn on your camera if you'd like to.
And if we can have you just state your name again and your address and your relationship to the project here.
You're muted, Cherie.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Well, my name is Cherie Kostler. I'm the secretary of the Friends of the Historic Union Community Hall, doing business as the Catherine Creek Community Center. I'm speaking today to express my support for the nomination of the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union to the National Historic Register. I've known this property since I moved to Union in junior high. And even then, the property stood out as prominent and special. And that's saying a lot because Union has a nice historic district. And we also have amazing number of historic homes, Victorian homes, also registered on the National Historic Register. In fact, at one time, Union was called the City of Victorian Heritage. My first experience in the building was, I still remember this, I was probably about 14 or 15. And I walked into the building and there were a bunch of ladies in the corner and they were sewing quilts. And I was probably there for a fundraiser or something, but the women of the Methodist Church at that time would do these quilts and they would give them to the fundraisers and all kinds of fun events. But, you know, they were having a great time and they were producing beautiful pieces of art. And I'll just always remember that time of first walking in that building and seeing that. But since that time, I had gone to the building for ice cream socials, spaghetti feeds, funerals, and weddings. So, you know, I wanted to really point out, even, let's see, how old am I? 40 years ago, that was a prominent and special building. In 2019, the Oregon Idaho Methodist Church decided to sell the building, along with a couple hundred other buildings in the region. And at that time, two church members came to myself and Tara Richter, also, who later became the first president, and was trying to figure out what to do. How do we save this really important, iconic building in the community? And so we all got together. Donna Beveridge also joined us at the time, and we formed a nonprofit. And then we moved to contacting the Ford Family Foundation, and we've got a $5,000 grant, a technical assistant grant, to research the feasibility of turning the building into a community center. And that was 2019. And we all know what happened in 2020. COVID. And it also, this is really important because that same year we started fundraising for the purchase of the building. And in 2020, during COVID, in a town of 2,200, our group raised $25,000 to purchase the building. So that has a lot to say with what the building meant to the community. Since acquiring the building, our nonprofit has worked to raise over $250,000 in grant funding to support the historic restoration of the building. That also included thousands of hours of volunteer time on top of that, because that's the way grants work. We've replaced the internal gutter system on the roof, painted the exterior, removed the commentary board, and restored and replaced the most damaged stained glass windows. We hope that each renovation had been done with sensitivity to the building's original design and craftsmanship. So more than just preserving the building, our group, our nonprofit group, our board has revitalized other aspects. Today, the building hosts the Union Food Bank, the Community Meals Program, a variety of youth programs, art programs, cultural programs. We also support local job training and economic development initiatives. The building continues to serve as a home for community events. From the beginning, as I mentioned, our board of directors has made historic preservation a central mission. It's listed in our mission as one of the things that we do. And we tried to do this in the building by creating what we call a memorial wall. And that's in the chapel area on the south side. And that's where the, Caitlin mentioned the stain, or it's a display area is in there. And we also launched the Community History Project, which is an online blog that I'll, collect any type of information that we can gather about the community or the Methodist Church or the region. We try to put that in an area as well. But researching the building has been, I think it's been delightful, and it's been revealing. It's also been educational. My vocabulary in architecture has increased trifold. But it's been fun just to follow those breadcrumbs of information and see what happens. As mentioned earlier, the Benjamin Price pieces of information, it's just exciting to see that we might be related to some of the amazing Benjamin Price pieces that are already listed in the National Historic Register. Let's see. It's just exciting to what we've learned about the building, and the community has been with us all along. We try to tell the community when we find a bit of information, we put it on our social sites. It's also important to know that today's work, it seems like we're still just opening up more possibilities for more information about the building and our local history, and even the history of the Methodist Church in the region. So it feels like it's we're inviting more. This is just a living history, and we want it to continue to unfold, and this is just one piece in the process. Let's see. Basically, I just want to point out that I feel like the Church of Union is vital in the fabric of our town's history, and its architecture is amazing and it's enduring. And I really believe that it is truly worth National Historic Register recognition. So if you have any questions, or I'm here to see what I can do to answer them, and I really want to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions for the applicant?
Would you like me to?
Yeah, if we don't have any questions, Cherie, thank you for your testimony. We really appreciate your diligence on this project and a very well-written nomination. We're going to turn it over to our lead reviewer for your comments, and that is Sarah. you'd like to share your review comments for the nomination, please?
Yes, thank you, Sherry. It's nice to hear your comments, and I want you to know how much I appreciated your assistance when my husband and I drove over to Union. Sherry made it possible for us to go in the building, even though there was no one there, and for us to look at the building outside and inside. It was really fun for us. It was a treat, and we really enjoyed seeing it. It's a beautiful building.
Thank you for visiting.
I do have some comments, and I think it's a beautiful example of, to just leap ahead to, Katie's questions that she's put on the board for us, which is, does the nomination make the case that the Methodist Episcopal Church of Union embodies the distinctive characteristics of late Gothic revival style as seen in the vernacular churches in Oregon? And I think Katie's presentation and listing of the character defining characteristics of the features of the church, the steeply pitched gable roofs, the arched stained glass windows and the transoms, the decorative cornice, the tracery, and imbricated shingles and the belfry millwork are all important in making that case. Kind of just to loosely, roughly summarize that, but I do have some more comments too. I think that that the strength of the nomination is in its is under criterion C and not so much under criterion A as a religious facility, although the date of significance is the date of the construction of the church, and through the major part of the life of the church of the building, it was operated as a church, and it still has religious services. It hasn't been significant beyond a local level, which I understand is that to be proposed as a religious property would have to meet a higher bar. It would have to be associated with events that have made a significant contribution to a broad pattern of history. And even though locally it has been significant as a church, I don't think that it has, their case was made to show that there was a significance at the state or diocesan level. So that you could say that it had made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of history under criterion A. Under criterion C, I think the case is well made. And I think that, and well presented in the nomination. I think the history of the church, which is presented there too, of the building, in the community is certainly strongly made. It has, was founded in the 19th century, and when they built the new church building in 1905, the old original building was turned over to the Catholic Church, and the bell was installed at Methodist Episcopal Church from the former Union Presbyterian Church in 1919. Shows the integration of the town in the building. I think that building has been well cared for even in recent years, especially since it was acquired by the by the Historic Union Community Hall Friends from the Oregon-Idaho Conference of the United Methodist Church in 2021. There have been some significant improvements. The closed gutter repaired, extended, the the cornice that had failed was repaired to prevent further the seepage between the plaster and the brick. Electrical system's been replaced with modern wiring, glass and metal memorial case from the Union High School is brought over, and in 2022, foundation was remortared. The top 10 feet of the chimney was removed. But that did not impact the integrity of the building, and a large tree from the corner actually improved its appearance, I think, probably. And the stained glass repair has been really significant, beautiful stained glass. My one comment that came from that they were, the windows have been described as lancet windows, and I think a more appropriate term for the bulk of the windows is that they're pointed arch windows, and made the largest window in the facade. It has what appears to be like two narrow lancet shaped windows. So I guess in terms of specific small recommendations, I guess the biggest recommendation is that it's be proposed under this criterion C, and that the term lancet windows be changed to pointed arch windows throughout, except in the case of the large window. The interior, I found more bothersome, and I think it was the partitions, even though two of them are historic rolling partitions on the ground floor. So I was kind of thinking that it would be nice to be able to roll those up occasionally, maybe once or maybe on Christmas, maybe certain times of year or for certain events, that it would kind of re-emphasize that the perpendicular, rectangular, or the Greek cross shape of the church. Plus it opens up the windows on the ends where those partitions have covered or partly covered them and made them not so visible from the inside. It'll be nice, I'm sure that the friends of Catherine Creek are intending to do further improvements, and I'm looking forward to having the non-historic paneling removed. It'd be fun to go back. I was really curious about the ceiling. It's a kind of a acoustic tile and it doesn't look original. And I was wondering about the light fixtures. So I'll be interested to see if there are more things about that. I had three extremely minor thoughts too. The box that indicates that it meets the National Register criteria was not checked. There would be no reason not to check that, I think. And then there was an extension of a sentence on page 8, third line from the bottom, should probably end at the word windows. And then on page 17, Stephen Dow Beckham was accidentally referred to as SR rather than Dr. DR. Those, I think, are my comments.
Very thorough. Thank you, Sarah. About comments from any other members?
I've got a few.
Okay.
And I'll start with what I like. Whenever you have a very snappy section 7, you get on it and it's done. I tend to value section 8 more because it just that's the guts of the nomination. And so I have to say that there's just very few typos, and the organization was good, the flow was good overall. And integrity and description. My comments are mostly in the use of late Gothic revival, because that's never explained, and I think that'd just be a quick change, however which way you want to do it. Partly because the Gothic revival is a very important development and I know this is later in the game, and we're not arguing high style or anything. But it would be nice just to, especially, American Gothic revival, which flowed from the English. And there were components of the building that, and this is no surprise, that come out of pattern books. And we know that A.J. Downing was an exponent of Gothic revival and popularized these pattern books to the point where, and I have a question for you, because I haven't been over there for at least 25 years. The Episcopal Church in Cove is often, or was often described as a Carpenter Gothic creation, and I hope it still exists. So it's just a little more definitive on the use of Gothic revival. And because that's the development, and follow Downing's work and others. That's where we get into styles like Italianate or Conan or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can get into Swiss chalets or whatever. And I think Downing uses something that was already in existence in terms of the vehicle, and that is quartermaster plans became pattern books. And if you're familiar with forts, if you're simply going to a catalog and saying, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And here, somewhat locally in the Dalles, you have the surgeon's quarters as an example of Gothic revival. And Downing's important because he translates British usage of stone and stuff into wood. And if I recommend to anybody to go over to Fort Simcoe in Washington, it's a wonderful collection of what was translated into being Gothic revival became a fort. So that's most of what I wanted to convey. Overall, well done, and maybe just some recommendations for a little more clarity in terms of the argument for Gothic revival. So that's it.
The Queen Anne on the outside of the gables.
Yeah, that's an example of detail, which I guess is fine. It's just what the combination was for this creation. Hard to get at some of that stuff, because it's usually not as a documentary record unless you get lucky.
Matthew?
Just a couple of comments, to not repeat what others have already said. Appreciated the call out of the 1950s edition, that's on the backside, recognizing that it sort of matches the architectural style and that it's brick, so it doesn't totally stand out, but it's obvious that it's not original. So always appreciate that. But overall, I think it was a good nomination. That's really all I had.
I have nothing else to add. Thank you for your wonderful reviews.
Oh,
Jackie
Jackie.
is speaking.
Oh, yes, Jackie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I thought it was a very well-written nomination and an amazing building that has been cared for so long. And the recent, renovations have been very sensitive to the beauty of the building. And I'm just one of those people that, and I realize also after our talk about being more focused on the context, but I was still very curious about the kind of the people involved in the construction, because there's a brief mention of a board of trustees. There's a mention of Reverend J.H. Walker, who kind of oversaw that construction. And I just was curious about the role of those people and their decision-making in overseeing that construction. I'm always looking for kind of the human element of these buildings and the community. And the only other, and so also my comment is in Appendix A, there's just a list of people, but I don't know how they fit into this story. And do they? Like, are they part of that original board of directors, or does that just give you a flavor of the types of people who were prominent in town? And so in some ways, that seemed a little bit like it was floating out there without much of a general explanation of why they were listed. So those were my comments, mostly. And is there more information about that of Walker? Because basically the nomination says, you know, he might have been involved during construction. So
Thank you, Jackie. Just looking at the time, I actually don't have any other comments that haven't been addressed, so appreciate, Sarah, your very thorough review and explanation, your findings, and everybody else's too. At this time, is there, a motion for this nomination?
I move that the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation recommend to the State Historic Preservation Officer that the Methodist Episcopal Church Union be forwarded to the Keeper of the National Register of Historic Places for listing in the National Register for its local significance under criterion C. In its architecture of Gothic revival style.
All second.
With the. Done.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. You had that pregnant pause.
With the minor alterations that the committee discussed today.
Now I can say.
Okay, there is a motion and a second, the nomination, there's a, never mind, I'll summarize it afterwards. I'll take vote by roll call. Jackie, you in favor of the motion to approve the nomination?
yes.
Okay, Matt,
Approved.
Steve,
Yes. Well, and I was trying to think about whether anyway, we'll, all this stuff will be reviewed.
Mhm. Sarah,
Yes.
Cassie,
Yes.
and Heidi? Yes. We have a majority vote of yes for forwarding the nomination to the State Historic, or from the State Historic Preservation Officer for review and recommendation to the Keeper of the National Register. Thank you. And we will submit, again, graphical comments in your registration evaluation forms. Please submit those to Katie for their record. All right. It is time for our next one. Give me one moment. Right. All right. Thank you. Pause. Our next nomination for review is of the, let's see, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm gonna say Balch.
Yes.
Balch Bridge? Balch. Fabulous. Balch Gulch Bridge. And this is And the right form here. And Portland. We will turn it over to staff for a brief introduction of the nomination.
Alrighty, the committee will now consider the proposed nomination for the Balch Gulch Bridge in Portland, which was coincidentally also built in 1905. The bridge is located in northwest Portland, and it connects the Willamette Heights neighborhood to the rest of the city by spanning this deep ravine, which contains Balch Creek and part of McClay Park. There is a metal staircase at the northeast corner of the bridge that connects the street to the park below. This staircase is not physically connected to the bridge, and it's a separate asset in the Portland Bureau of Transportation's portfolio. So it's not considered an alteration, and it's not included in the nominated boundary, which is limited to the structure itself. The Balch Gulch Bridge is comprised of two steel trusses of different lengths, one 160-foot long 8-panel main span truss, and one 60-foot long 3-panel side span truss, between 3 steel towers with concrete footings. The trusses are both unconnected Pratt deck. So to break down what a Pratt deck truss is, a Pratt truss means that the diagonal members slope toward the center of the span and they act in tension while the vertical members act in compression. Deck truss just means that the truss part is below the deck, below the driving surface. And connected means that the joints are connected by pins. And the nomination explains this was the predominant connection method used in truss bridges built before the early 20th century, when most new bridges started being built using riveted connections, which were more robust. While the bridge today generally looks pretty similar to how it did when it was built, parts of it have experienced pretty extensive alterations. So the original railing, which looked like this on the left side of the screen, was removed and replaced in the 1950s after a terrible accident when someone went over the side of the bridge. It was replaced by this plain tube railing in that photo on the right. And then in 2014, the bridge underwent an extensive rehabilitation that involved removing and replacing basically everything that's over those 2 steel Pratt deck trusses. So the trusses were braced to connect them during the rehabilitation. That's what's circled in this photo here. And the original floor beams were replaced with replicas that were engineered to carry heavier loads. The wood decking was replaced with steel. And the wood sidewalks, which by that point had already been replaced several times in kind, were replaced by these non-slip aluminum planks. Guardrails were updated. And then also notice that the tube railing that I just pointed out that was installed in the 1950s, that was replaced with this close reproduction of the original made from coated galvanized steel. Despite all the changes to the floor beams and the deck, the nomination argues that the bridge has integrity because it retains its most important character defining features, which it says are the bridge's location, setting, and association with the Willamette Heights neighborhood, and the design, materials, and workmanship of those 2 rare and connected Pratt deck trusses. So the nomination argues that the Balch Gulch Bridge is significant in 2 ways, under 2 criteria. First, the nomination says it's a statewide significance under criterion C in the area of engineering. This is a very rare example of this truss type and of a once common connection technology. The Balch Gulch Bridge is one of only 4 remaining deck truss highway bridges in Oregon. Deck trusses, this truss type is in general rarer than through and pony truss types, where the trusses are above the vehicle surface. Partially because deck truss bridges require a lot of vertical clearance under the roadway, and partially because they're more commonly used for railroad bridges than highway bridges. The Balch Gulch Bridge is also one of only 13 extant pin connected type bridges of any truss type in Oregon, and it's the state's only extant example of a bridge that features both a deck truss and pin connections. Because pin connections were once the dominant connection technology for truss bridges, and because so few of them remain extant today, the nomination argues that it really matters. It's really significant that this is one of the last surviving examples in Oregon. Additionally, the nomination argues that the Balch Gulch Bridge is locally significant under criterion A in the area of community planning and development for its role in the growth of the Willamette Heights neighborhood and important efforts to market itself during the 1905 Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition. Before the bridge was opened in early 1905, there was no continuous streetcar service to the west side of the Willamette Heights neighborhood. over here, which that was platted around 1890, and it was really in the early stages of development around the turn of the century. The original bridge that was built over the gulch around 1892 wasn't strong enough to support a streetcar. So when the Gulch Bridge was built, that for the first time allowed continuous streetcar service into the neighborhood, which for development. You can see on this map, which was created after the Gulch Bridge was constructed, how early development was concentrated along Northwest Thurman, along that streetcar line, and along the ridge here, which was a nice view to the east, which is relevant because the nominations preparer also argues that the increased accessibility to the Willamette Heights neighborhood made possible by this bridge was a significant boon for Portland's marketing of itself during the 1905 Lewis and Clark Exposition. So this opened about 5 months after the bridge did. The west side of the Willamette neighborhood, which was accessed by the streetcar via the bridge, provided a uniquely good view of the exposition grounds, and it ended up being the vantage point for a few of the promotional images for the fair, like the stereograph and some of the other ones that you saw in the appendix for this nomination. The streetcar route across the bridge and into the Willamette Heights neighborhood was even advertised to tourists in the fair's promotional materials as a fun way to spend the day, because that area showed off not only the fairgrounds, but also the city's natural beauty as it's kind of sandwiched between forested lands, and also its development potential, which Portland in general was trying to advertise during the fair to bring in more investment and economic growth. In summary, the discussion for the committee today is, does the nomination make the case for statewide significance under criterion C in the area of engineering? Does the nomination make the case for local significance under criterion A in the area of community planning and development? Does the bridge retain sufficient integrity to communicate its significance under criteria A and C? And is the period of significance appropriate for criteria A and C? Again, this property is located within CLG, the city of Portland. The Portland Historic Landmarks Commission's comments in support of the nomination were shared with the SACHP before this meeting, along with comments from the Portland Bureau of Transportation, who own and manage the bridge. The committee have any questions for staff before we welcome testimony?
Do any committee members have an actual potential conflict of interest to declare? Hearing none, we will turn it over. We have Michael Taylor here in person, if you'd like to come up. Will the owl catch his voice at that table?
It's good.
That is good,
Okay.
yes. You can just state your name for the record and your relationship to the application here, your nomination.
I'll
And
warn you, I'm garrulous and I'll try to speak up and I'm gonna try mightily to keep it short,
we
so.
have about 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, oh, that's generous. I thought it was gonna be less, so,
Well,
yeah.
it's pushing it at 10, so
I'll try not to do that. I
thank you.
get carried away. Okay, so for the record, my name is Michael Taylor and I reside at 2020 Northwest Northrop Street. So I'm actually in the location of the old ice hippodrome. We're in a senior building. But I've lived many years within walking distance of Forest Park and the Clay Park and the bridge. And I'm the author of the nomination that's before you today. So it's to recommend naming Portland's Gulch Bridge to the National Register of Historic Places. And it's been waiting a long time. So I'm excited about this. But why don't more Portlanders know about the Gulch Bridge? It's quirky and it's different, like it's the very essence of Portland. 400 feet long, green as the trees around it, and the most popular gateway to Forest Park. If you're going to leave there sooner up into the Wildwood. I think that if you're standing on the deck and looking for trusses, it just confuses you because you don't see them, they're down below. And the best word to describe the bridge today is unexpected, because it's not a bridge you would build today. And so people really don't know exactly how to take it when they first see it. It surprises me again and again. When I've had to look things up and educate myself, which I like to do because I have to explain it to other people. And they ask me questions when I'm measuring the bridge down in the park. So it's good to know these things. But Gulch Bridge, as Katie said, was found eligible for the National Register 40 years ago. And that was when ODOT did a study to identify bridges over 50 years old that were significant in some way. Attrition happens, and so right now there's a difference in the number of bridges that are still falling into that category. I don't believe it's changed for the Balch Gulch Bridge, but being identified is only a start. And so to jumpstart this process, the main thing I had to do was to prove that the bridge remains eligible. Because we got a pass. I mean, this is something the church didn't get. 40 years ago, somebody in the state said, you qualified, and you just need somebody to bring it through to the end. And so that's what's happening now. With methodology, I followed the National Register's very detailed and numerous instructions, which I downloaded, pursued archival and paper trails, used field inspection methods that I've used in the past, because I've done transportation research before, and it was helpful. These included physical examination, photography of all aspects of the bridge and surrounding terrain, and taking note of architectural and engineering details, just in case something had come up that wasn't reported by PBOT or ODOT in the last 40 years. Requisitioned reviewed original plans for the bridge, the maintenance records from 1905, pondered the mystery of pin connections, which is interesting to me. Read old newspapers, scanned letters, ordinances, minutes, other city, county, state, and public work generated materials. Talked to local people to get their feelings and their memories. I was fortunate to have Katie's support because she's an expert and has done this before. So her enthusiasm and experience were really invaluable. And then many of my friends who excel in specialty areas are engineers, library science people, historians, contributed their enthusiasm. And so that's been a huge help in carrying it along. Now, the two areas of significance, the most important, of course, the one that's almost a given is the engineering. And that I'm going to say, yes, I went through and checked everything. For the two projects that were major that occurred since the ODOT designated this as being something that could go to the National Register, no adverse effect was found for any of the changes that were made. The significant elements that cannot change or it would be a bust, which are something happening to the trusses or to the pin connections, which are unaffected, has not occurred. And so there's a pass, and then for the last 40 years, no adverse effect in any of the work that was done on the bridges. So to me, that leaves it pretty much in the clear. The only thing I was interested in, and I did pursue, was that I know people might also be interested, as I was, in how many bridges that qualified 40 years ago are still qualified, like the Balch Gulch Bridge seems to be. So I made the effort to go through, contact ODOT and their bridge person who does a bridge check every so many years. And I wanted to double check my list against theirs. And what I found was a lot of attrition that, and we listed it in here, on pages 20 and 21. And that's where you can find that, almost half of the bridges that were pin connected are no longer qualified for the National Register. They can't go anywhere. So there's two left, and the ones, some of them, others are failing or they're in private ownership. So the more years that go by, the rarer this gets. And right now, it's already the oldest bridge in Oregon and Portland. As Katie mentioned, it's the only one that's a Pratt deck truss that's been connected. It's in a class by itself. So to see that, and then to see that the only ones with hanging trusses, the other three, are in Portland. They're Warren trusses, so they're not even Pratt trusses, and they are riveted. They're not pin connected. So the only thing they have in common is they have hanging trusses. But anyway, I won't get into the questions people ask, but a lot of them have to do with the trusses. And if you're interested in any of those, I can mention it, but they're kind of just, they're fluff and they're beside the point, except it just shows how interested and invested people are in the bridge, and they will not leave me alone when I measure and stuff. Oh, can you tell me why? So the answer guy. But anyway, the other area of significance is the one that's all over the map, and that's what makes it different from a house or a church or something like that, is its community involvement, and so it has to do with what difference did this bridge make in people's lives in Portland, in Oregon, as far as national trends go? So there is no question that the bridge is connected and was connected long before it was built to plans for the Lewis and Clark Exposition. I not only found that in records that we use citations for in the application, but after I go back to the primary sources and I see evidence of what's happening, and there's some very interesting evidence that things were planned as much as 5 years before, because they were long planners at that time, and business people really, their interests were as important to the city of Portland as city of Portland's own interests, and were seen as synonymous. And so the city wrote an ordinance, and they gave, or I guess they charged the group of business people who planned the Lewis and Clark Exposition $1. And then just let them go with it, because they thought the interests of the exposition would be good for Portland. And so that was how it started. But the playing field's larger. I targeted research that was focusing on development of neighborhoods, so Willamette Heights in particular, which needed the bridge, and contractors applied for the bridge when the first one looked like it might be going to fail. And a lot of gulch bridges were failing at the time. Willamette Heights, the exposition, the fact that L.L. Hawkins, who was the first park person, was working with the Olmsteads because they were in town to plan the Lewis and Clark Exposition on the parks. A lot of reference was made in Hawkins' Florida material that went into papers about how you could see these things from the exposition. You should go up to the park and you shouldn't be afraid because it was a friendly forest, and, you know, great pictures you could take from the bridge. And so he was pushing it. But one that really stuck out to me, and I won't go into a lot of detail about it because there is information about it a little bit on page 15, but every time I look more into it, I see more planning. And that, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Charles Swigert or the Swigert family in Portland. They were the owners and starters of Esco and Heister, and he came up from San Francisco originally. Port of Portland hired him in 1891 when they were first formed. And when he came here, he brought his bridge company, he brought his contracting company, and one of the first people he hired was the man who was the designer of the Balch Gulch Bridge, who was a dredge specialist from Puget Sound. So he had an engineering degree. So his plan, his long plan, was bring a guy up here, and he was very well suited for the job. And then the year that he came, the bids were open for Balch Creek Bridge, and the bids were open for Marble Bridge. And so he came at it from both sides, got the Balch Creek Bridge designer to apply for Balch Creek Bridge, brought in his contracting company in order to do the work and build the bridge. And then he bid specifically for Pacific, his company, the Market Bridge. And so at the same time, he made friends with Henry Corbett, got into banking, got into electric streetcars. At that time, there'd been a lot of them, but it was down to 2 electric streetcar companies, and he bought the other one out. And so he was cornering the market. So by 1905, when the exposition opened, he had control of the bridge, so he could put tracks on it and get it all set up. He set up 4 special routes for Lewis and Clark Exposition that were streetcar routes, and benefited from that. And those are all on the maps that we have in the application as well. They make a point of pointing it out, including the railway line that ran a special Yellowstone line to Portland so that they could come to this exposition, which, speaking of like a global effect, this was the first exposition like the one in Chicago and the one in St. Louis that happened west of the Rocky Mountains. So Portland had an exposition before Seattle did, before Tacoma did, before San Francisco did, before Los Angeles did. And I thought it was great because at that time, Seattle and Tacoma were not a threat to Portland. They really weren't, except in maybe barge building or something, but it touched me, it touched my heart. So, yeah, Swigert, I'm almost finished, so, yeah. So Swigert, anyway, cornered the market on that. And then, the story from then on is just that I came to the president, I looked at all the remarks that were being made, which just people pull out of books that are being written down on blogs, that they all say the same thing, which is Balch Gulch Bridge was built for the 1905 Lewis and Clark Centennial Expedition and World's Trade Fair as a gateway to Portland's developing Willamette Heights neighborhood. And Dr. Hadlow followed that up when I was talking to him by saying that it's a noteworthy historic and engineering treasure. It's one of the most significant in Oregon. So it's worthy of saving. And then PBOT, again and again, has made the decision not to tear it down and to save it, especially after the 40-year mark when ODOT identified it as eligible. But they said, considering the age of the bridge, it would have been so easy to replace it with a shiny new one. However, the easy path was never chosen, given its unique characteristics, its special place in Portland history, and its eligibility for the National Register. Rehabilitation of the Balch Gulch Bridge was really the only viable option, and we did it carefully. They had specialists come in. So thank you so much. It's a rare chance, I think, to have a bridge that's rare in the entire country, recognized. And anything that you'd like to ask, just don't get me too started. I'll try to, sorry about taking longer than I should have.
I love your enthusiasm. So
Got enthusiasm for it.
are there any questions, Michael? Thank you. Matthew, are you the lead reader?
I am, yep.
Okay, would you like to kick us off?
Sure.
It looked like you had something.
Oh, I always have something to say. I will try and keep it brief since we are running short on time. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. It was very well written, very well researched. Definitely get your enthusiasm in the nomination as here. So thank you again for that. But questions that I think we need to consider is, does the nomination make the case for criterion C for engineering? And I think absolutely it does, considering it is the only bridge of its type, being the pin connected truss bridge. So I think that absolutely does make the case. Does it make the case for the local significance under A for community planning and development? I do think that it does. I think the nomination does a really good job of tying in, especially after your presentation on context today, that really helped sort of open I turn a light on for me for this nomination of like, oh yeah, okay, this is what Katie's talking about, and this is what you did in the nomination. So I think that I think the nomination focuses in very well, is very thorough, but is not overly expansive, which is what is important. So I do think that it does meet the nomination under criterion A. It definitely retains significant integrity under A and C. And I do believe that the period of significant is appropriate as well, because it's very limited to that construction date and the Lewis and Clark fair. So those were my thoughts, and I do think it was very well written, excellently researched, cited. Yeah, very well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cassie, do you have any comments to add?
I don't, I think it was really well done. I appreciate you coming here today to talk to us about it.
And I love coming to Hood River too. I must say, this is so beautiful right now.
Sarah?
I thought it was really well done too. I did have a couple little comments. One is that, and I'm not, technically, proficient at all. And so the first thing that hit me when I started reading the application were the words pin connected Pratt deck truss. And it made it really hard to go on.
I know what you mean, because other people feel that way. Yeah.
I didn't know what it meant. So I guess, one thing I thought, if there could be like a footnote that might just kind of give a little bit, just like 10 words or something, what we mean about that, especially because, I mean, pin connected, and I mean, those words really embody the significance of the bridge.
This is kind of what I was saying when I said it's a different bridge when you look at it today than when you looked at it in 1905, because everybody would have known what that meant. And now it's like, you can't even look at it on the bridge because it's all sealed and linseed oil. And so, yeah, I think, did we Katie, was there something from Sharon's book that she has a glossary and it has a description? I thought I saw something like that. Yeah,
I was thinking of something, this is gonna be wrong.
but something.
In a
like
Pratt deck truss, the roadway is at the top of the truss. Pratt truss has diagonals that slope downward and toward the center.
Yes,
And I mean, just that kind of wording was all I was thinking about, just,
yeah, just to make it a little
yeah,
clearer. I
yeah.
think that's definitely doable.
Anyway, but I don't know, maybe other people didn't feel that way, but it was just a stopper for me and it was the whole point.
Yeah,
And-
finding a really good picture is hard too, because there's a difference in a lot of the pin connections and it did go on for a good period of time. This is like right at the end and it's almost amazing that they went with it, except that I think that they wanted an inexpensive bridge and the tower, the engineer for Portland latched onto them because he saw that they were less expensive and they had a contracting company just waiting that knew how to do it. Yeah.
I thought the photos and figures were great. It was difficult to understand the diagrams because they had to be so little.
Oh, yeah, the originals are the size of this tape. So
Yeah.
you're right.
I guess there was really no correction for that. And the description of the preceding wooden structure and what people had to do to work around it was,
Oh my God.
was just very.
Well, there's a lot of things that didn't make it in there, but one of them was that the mothers in Land Heights didn't want their children going down in the dark across without a stairwell signs because of hobos. They were afraid hobos would be down there at night and they would bother the children, so, yeah.
Steve, do you have any comments?
Well, I was looking over I did this quite some time ago, because I was gonna be away, but, it's, almost all complimentary. In fact, words like overall excellent, a real model for future work, that sort of thing. So, overall, there were just a couple of things and they're more in the editorial realm. It's too bad the figure eight. There's some way around showing what it wants to convey. But otherwise, I mean, that's pretty darn minor, so, and I'll just stop there. I think in future presentations, sometime in the far future, they'll, option put up holograms. And that would be so helpful with something like this.
Right. Jackie, do you have any comments on this nomination?
Yes. I thought it was a really great, well-written nomination. And I particularly think that the quote by Henry Petrowski, where the end that it was a bridge for that time and place. And I think the nomination really captures that feeling and weaves in all those stories about the construction, the events that happened, and it just made it go together so well. The only one minor issue I had was a description of a circular bar as the pin, which is kind of confusing. And I think when I looked up information about steel, that type of bar might be called a round bar. So maybe just a little alteration with that.
Do you
But
have
otherwise-
We have one.
Yeah, I mean, I just Googled, I think circular bars or so that's just a little technical thing. Because a circular bar seemed more like a circle rather than circular in cross section.
Okay, we can get into that.
But otherwise, great nomination.
My only question that hasn't been addressed already is the boundary, the extent, and having it just stop right at the end of the bridge versus questioning if it needs to continue on to the ground on each end. Just concerned about it just being the actual bridge itself and not having that boundary include its connections because that gulch is so important. And I know there was, you know, description of why the gulch wasn't included, but having connection ends. Seems like that's relative.
Especially about very important.
Yeah. I'm not sure, now I wanna go out and look, it's always my impression that the abutments went beyond the gulch, but, I think it deserves another look, just to be sure.
Yes.
I can jump to, so the way we define the boundary for the bridge, we looked at recently listed bridges in Oregon and use that as a pattern.
Okay.
I would say too, if you choose to, you know, it's a matter of process. If you choose to ask the boundary be amended, it has to come back to you. Then has to, now, I'm not saying don't pursue this line of questioning, but do realize if you do ask for a boundary to be adjusted under the state rule, it does have to come back because that changes the nominated area, which means we have to re-notify. If it gets bigger, if it gets smaller, we don't.
Well, I think knowing, I mean, if that's kind of the typical pattern of nominated bridges to just be the extent of the bridge itself, that answers my question.
Yeah.
I have a couple
Yes.
So I was looking at this, I think it's just more of an issue of consistency, because in section 7, it has a really good description of the significance. It's a rare example of a pin-connected steel Pratt deck truss bridge. And I realize, you know, it's in the writing of this, trying not to repeat things, but in subsequent text throughout section 7 and 8, it'll emphasize maybe a little bit more the pins or a little bit maybe more of the truss. And I think that's a little bit of wordsmithing, because as I was reading it, I felt like, okay, which way are we leaning? And in listening to your presentation is absolutely clear, we're looking at a whole. So I think just making sure that that is consistent throughout. The other thing that I was looking for I suggest considering that. The other piece I was looking at was the period of significance under criterion A. A single year is unusual, but not unjustified. But what made me start to question is, we kept talking about the continued trend and development of the neighborhood, which suggests that it should extend. So my recommendation there would be just to re-examine that and either be clear why it's the single year or consider extending it to include the full development of the Willamette Heights neighborhood on that side. Either would work. It's just, you know, having it as a single year and then having things like, you know, development continue. There's similar statements up throughout section 8 calls into question why it's just a single year. So that was, and also Sarah and Jackie, I second your comments on just quick definitions, especially up front of, you know, what's a deck truss, you know, Pratt deck truss, what's a pin connection, because if the structures or, you know, objects, sometimes you have to just include just a little bit of definition, but it's in there once you get into it, but up front would be helpful.
It's a lot of pages, I know, and I think but I recognize there's some consistency and misspelling issues that we have to address, you know, but that's,
Well, like I said, minor editing, it's a well-written nomination.
thank you. And it's not that long either.
Mm-mm.
Oh, no,
Doesn't need
it's
to
the
be.
longest one you've seen. There's some, here I ask, you know. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up, Ian, the significance. I had a question about the period of significance that I didn't ask. And yeah, so I mean, because we're using both criteria A and C, then
It can be 1 year.
it can be 1 year.
Yeah, it can be 1 year for both. It just, you know, like all I was saying was, for under criterion A, when you have those statements that seem to indicate that that trend is going on, it begs the question, right? So it might just be, if we want to keep a single year period of significance, which is perfectly justifiable, it simply needs to be more clear in those types of statements that are potentially projecting the context out, need to be modified or corralled somehow, so that it's not asking that question.
Well, Matt, would you feel comfortable making a motion?
Yeah, before I make a motion, I have one more comment. I did want to commend PBOT for their efforts to preserve and restore this bridge. That has gone a long way in keeping its integrity and keeping it extant and getting us to where we are today. So congratulations and good work on that. I do move that we forward the Balch Gulch Bridge nomination to the keeper for listing on the National Register with minor revisions as discussed.
Is that clear enough? Do we need to address what these discussions are?
What's standard practice?
I think it's clear enough, and I would understand the motion to mean they're sticking with the single, year period of significance under criteria A and C. We're just gonna tighten the language. Is that correct?
Boundary is good the way it is, but needs-
We're just gonna clean up the language under the argument that it also already exists.
thank you. Okay,
Oh, thank you all. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
so we have a motion and a second. And let's start with Matt this time.
It'd be weird if I said no when I. So yes.
Or-
Okay,
Yeah, it's okay.
yes.
All right, Cassie,
Yes.
Jackie,
Yes.
great. Steve,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Heidi? Yes. Great. Well, the nomination is approved for moving to, the keeper of the National Register for, well, I guess now, Ian. I don't know. Chrissy, are you still signing this one?
No, I won't be signing this one. This is gonna be Ian's first batch.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I
Yeah.
just love talking about it, so.
Well, it's incredible. I love your shirt too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, to be recognized.
Yes, we've got several things like this. I've got a hat too, but I like you figured it out before, so I'm gonna figure it out.
Okay, it is almost right on time. Way to go, everybody. Thank you. At this time, I'm gonna turn it over to Chrissy, who has a couple recognitions to share with us.
Oh. Whoops.
Well, it's a day of comings and goings. And I'm going to acknowledge somebody today who left this committee, a while ago. And we were unable, due to circumstances I can't quite remember, to acknowledge his service on this committee. I always call him Professor Beckham, Dr. Beckham, Steve Beckham, Stephen Dow Beckham. You have lots of names in my mind. Former chair of this committee. Steve Beckham served on this committee twice, and we did some math. And between your first and second terms, you have been 21 years on this committee. And I think it's great that even every single meeting, it seems like at least one of the nominations would have your name in the bibliography or in the selected text or the text itself, or and always a story from you about a direct interaction with that property. And it just brought it to life every single time. And we have missed that. And in fact, the Methodist Church we saw today mentioned you a couple of times. Without further ado, also, Beckham was my professor at Lewis and Clark College. So it's pretty moving for me to be able to give you this and to properly thank you. If you would like to come up.
Congratulations on your service.
Thank you. It doesn't make you feel old, does it?
It's her retirement made me feel old. Indeed. Just a couple comments. I believe I started service on this committee 50 years ago. I was named by Governor Straub and Atia first time around, and then had a long second period of service. There were 3 nominations over those nearly 2 decades of service that were really memorable. They produced large crowds. We had attorneys in the room and quite a bit of stress for the committee. I refer to the Eastmoreland Historic District in Portland, to the irrigation canals on the Deschutes Plain east of Bend, and to the Zooliner Railroad for the Portland Zoo that was opposed by Metro, the owner and operator of that popular tourist attraction. Those three nominations, are sort of etched in my memory. One other thing, Chrissy and staff had faith in me in 2012. I'd had a stroke. I'd had to leave teaching. I was not in the best of shape physically. And by golly, I got the opportunity through the office to go out and work on 3 National Register segments of the Oregon Trail. And John Pooley and Ian were among those who.
And me. You got 2 of us.
Yeah, I have 3 wonderful field assistants, and that recharged my batteries. And I thank all of you for that. This was a very pleasant moment of public service. And I have really been thrilled with the course of historic preservation in Oregon and the way in which it is really integrated with Tour Oregon, Oregon tourism, heritage understanding, and long-term planning. I view the National Register as a premier planning tool, and I believe it is working. Thank you so much.
We have a couple of really great pictures. One of you holding your shoes in the middle of a stream, somewhere in the middle of nowhere with one of you. Was it you?
It was John.
It was John?
John.
Oh,
So I accompanied you across the Naval Weapons System borderman. And we got there and spent probably half an hour, 45 minutes on UXO and mech awareness and training. And the main point was, don't pick anything up and don't touch anything. And we got out there and started walking, and we weren't more than 10 minutes into our survey. And what do we come across? A piece of metal. And what does he do? He kicks it. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I just killed Dr. Beck.
those were exactly my instructions to all of you going out, was please bring him back alive.
Yeah, you sat us down in your cube.
And then there was that picture of your first term with Governor Attia is also in the annals of our SHPO history. It's a really great picture of that first committee that you were on. It's particularly important to me that you're here today as my last meeting. Sorry, because I wouldn't be here without you. On to, are Mark or Julie here with us today?
Mark is registered, but he hasn't joined, and we
Okay.
can certainly send them the recording.
Okay, well, I want to acknowledge Mark Tedesco, who also served quite a long time on this committee. He was here 9 years. And if some of you out in the Etherland don't know, the terms are 8 years, but you serve and you can serve until you replace. So Mark was 9 years on this committee. He's the archaeologist from Southern Oregon. And we were hoping to see him today,
I
but
just joined.
oh, he did? Oh, super. Mark, thank you for your service.
Hello.
For 9 years sitting on this committee. Hi.
Hi.
We miss you.
I miss you guys too. I was hoping to make it up there, but I just couldn't manage it.
Well, nonetheless, we have a nice certificate for you. We will pop in the mail. And
Awesome.
we just wanted to say thank you for your service, and we hope if we're ever down in when we're down next in Southern Oregon, you will pop by and say hello.
Absolutely.
All right. And the last one today is for Julie Osborne. who also served for 9 years and out of the Astoria area. And Julie was one of our National Register coordinators.
And
Back-
compliance,
Yes, and compliance, that's right.
and the parks historian,
Yes, she went to, that's true.
yeah.
Kind of came to SHPO, left SHPO, and came back to SHPO. And then served on this committee for 9 years. So well done, Julie. And she's not here today, or online, but we have a night certificate for her as well. So big hand for Mark and Peter. Okay. Steve, we have a little thingy for it if you want to keep it a little bubble wrap. Okay, that's it for me.
Well, I think you actually need to stay up where you're at, so. So it is my pleasure on behalf of Parks and Recreation to present the departmental gifts upon someone's retirement and years of service. I've been serving with Chrissy for 18 of her 25 years. This is her 25 years. I was her first hire in the position I currently occupy. So I've stuck around a little bit while, and I've been management with her for the last 10 years. In her capacity, Chrissy, I believe, started with Section 106 compliance, went to the National Register program, then regretted going into management ever since. But as one of my memories with Chrissy was she was a good mentor and hands-on manager. Worked on her with a lot of projects, but I particularly appreciate working on the Paul Bunyan statue, which kind of got dropped into our laps. Prepared just kind of stalled out and we needed to write it, and we split it. Chrissy wrote the Section 7 the physical description. I wrote the Section 8, and we worked closely together, and that was a lot of fun and a good opportunity to learn hands-on with your manager and learn how to do things. And Chrissy's seen certainly quite a bit. What I particularly imagine, you get a lot of folks to the end of their management career and they kind of put their feet up, just gonna pose right into the end, retire in place, I think is what we call that at the state. But Chrissy's been very active these last several years, and over her career, I could go through a lot of things she's accomplished. But I think, just a sampling of what she's done this in the last few years is the bureaucratic endurance of getting special assessment through. That sounds like a minor thing, but it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of talking to senators and representatives and speaking with other advocates and making sure that gets done and just not giving up, right? Just push, but not too hard so you get fired. But just kind of keeping up and making sure that happens. And the other is the Hughes flying boat. When that was brought to me, I'm like, oh, Park Service is never gonna list that, whatever. I was really down on it. I was. Chrissy's like, yeah, let me take a look at it. And again, the faith that it's gonna work and pushing and really making that argument and spending the time. A lot of what Chrissy does, any kind of management, is behind the scenes. You don't necessarily see it the same way some of our other work, being able to push that forward to support the staff. So I'm incredibly thankful for everything you've done. So what we have here is the 25-year pin. It's the Parks Shield.
I have 5 of these now. I did, right? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25.
Yep, you get one for every 5 years completed.
Oh my God.
We have the Oregon, the official retirement flag.
Wow. This sort of stuff shouldn't mean that much. It's just a wooden plaque, but it does. It really does.
Thank you. And a certificate of recognition from the big boss, the director.
Oh, gosh. Well, probably I'll quote from Hamilton or something, because that's what I normally do. But I actually, I'm not sure what to say. Ian was my first hire, exactly right. And from that time on, there have been good decisions and bad decisions in 25 years. And I hope that the good ones overshadow the ones that were made in the effort of learning the ropes and learning how to be bureaucrat scholar is what I like to think of myself as, and I like to encourage that in my staff to always be out there and, doing the thing you love. And, you know, the last 10 years have been tough. Eastmoreland and the canals happened right as I became the deputy SHPO. But we both got our field promotions the same year. And the best thing I think I have ever done is get out of the way of my awesome staff and also surround all of us with people who are doing this work and who are doing a great job and who have really meant something to each other and to the state and perpetuating and leveraging the great mentorship I have received over the last 25 years. And I hope that my biggest wish is that it keeps paying forward. That's the best thing I could ever want. And I'm touched. I'm probably will cry, but not in front of you. So thank you so much. And I told Ian, get me my damn pin, please. What's my 5-year pin, 25-year pin? I followed in my dad's footsteps with state service, and I wish he could see this, but he's up there somewhere. I think our work really matters. And I will quote Hamilton, history has its eyes on you. And who lives, who dies, who tells your story, that's a real thing. So let's make sure we tell all the stories and not leave anybody out. Because sometimes they don't get a second chance to come back. So yeah, no pressure. History has its eyes on you. With that, thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you, everyone. And Katie, do you have anything else? So our next meeting?
I do, it's really hard to follow that.
I know. Hard to go back to business after that.
So first of all, thank you everybody for everything you contribute to the National Register program in Oregon. Committee members, after the meeting, if you could pass any notes that you'd like to be included in the revision memos and your laminated sheets over to me, that'd be great. And if you haven't already, make sure to fill out your travel forms before you leave. Then, yeah, we hope to see you all at the next meeting, which will be a joint meeting with the Oregon Heritage Commission, Oregon Commission on Historic Cemeteries, and Historic Assessment Review Committee. And that'll be in Candy, October 15th through 17th. So do take note that it's a 3-day meeting. It's a little bit longer than normal because of the joint.
And say again, who we're meeting with?
The other Oregon Heritage Committees. So Oregon Heritage Commission, yeah, Oregon Heritage Commission, Oregon Commission on Historic Cemeteries, which are 3 heads, and then the Historic Assessment Review Committee, which Joy was
Cemetery
there.
Commission.
Is it at the church camp or somewhere else?
I'm sorry.
Is it at the church camp or somewhere else?
It'll be mostly downtown.
Gotcha.
And one last announcement, after the meeting adjourns, I hope you will remain with us to celebrate.
And if you have any questions about your travel form, Jamie Jones is in the back there. She can help you get that all laid out correctly so you can get reimbursed properly.
We do need a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Cassie, are you in favor?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes, okay.
Sarah has stepped out. Jackie, are you still with us?
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. And Sarah's back. Sarah, are you in agreement that we should adjourn our meeting?
Almost.
Almost?
One more little thing for Chrissy. But you can open it now.
I can.
There's maybe two.
It's a century.
Thank you. You're welcome. That's an historic publication that came out in 1937.
Wow. To add to my Timberline collection. It's wonderful, thank you.
All this time. I am now in her.
Thank you, and I am too, so meeting adjourned. Thank you.
I forgot to mention that Curry did some math, and this is my 100th state advisory.
No way.
Yeah.
You need to pay for that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.